Chapter 510. Through the rearview mirror their gazes met. Jinwan smiled at him, and a single tear fell from the corner of her eye, flowing down the side of her nose. The smile on her lips did not change. Mo Jingshan watched her, and his gaze deepened inch by inch. At this moment the kidnapper noticed that their eyes met. He thought that the two of them had a tacit understanding to resist and immediately smashed the butt of the gun against Jinwan's head. As she groaned in pain, he abruptly tugged at her hair and gave her a harsh slap, scolding, "Turn your head away." Jinwan's face was filled with rage. The kidnapper's face was filled with rage as he cursed, "Turn your head away." Jinwan's head was instantly pressed to the side. Her body was almost twisted from the pressure, and she gritted her teeth in pain. Her body trembled. Mo Jingshan watched as blood slowly flowed from Jinwan's head to the back of her neck, dyeing her clothes red. At this moment his gaze turned even colder. He drove the car to 180 kilometers per hour, speeding toward the deserted Binhai Road. The kidnapper's face was injured by Jinwan earlier, and half of his face was covered in blood. When he saw that the woman was struggling to resist, he immediately revealed a bloodthirsty smile. "Little girl, he's not a driver at all. The two of you are a couple, aren't you?" Jinwan's head was pressed against the back of the seat. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, hoarsely saying, "No." "Still so stubborn? Earlier on, in order to save this man, you didn't even care about your own life. It's clear that you want to fight us to the death. However, if you want to fight us to the death with those thin arms and legs of yours, this old man won't even need a gun. I can press you down with my bare hands." As he spoke, the kidnapper fiercely tugged at her hair again. Seeing that half of Jinwan's face was swollen from the earlier blow, he directly pressed the muzzle of the gun against her face. His gaze was roguish and filled with viciousness as he said, "Tell me, when I open fire, should I first shoot through your head? Or should I just shoot you in the face with your delicate skin and tender flesh? Shoot on both sides of your face, leaving a bloody hole on each side. It must look good, right?" There was a faint scent of blood in the car. He wasn't sure if it was the kidnapper's blood or the blood from Jinwan's head that had been smashed by the gun butt. Jinwan closed her eyes and said calmly and depressingly, "Didn't I drive you to escape?" The car kept speeding up. "Why are you in such a rush to kill me? If you really kill me, I'm afraid that both of you will die today." The kidnapper, however, laughed loudly. He tugged at her hair and forced her head to tilt back. "Baby, such a fierce character doesn't match your enchanting and sexy little figure at all. If you had begged for mercy, perhaps we could have given you a quick death on account of your soft and tender skin. One shot and it'll be over. You won't even feel any pain before you go straight to hell. What a pity your character makes this old man want to bully you for a while longer." As he spoke, the kidnapper purposely moved his hand down her hair. When he touched Jinwan's waist, he narrowed his eyes and moved the gun that was originally pressed against her face down, pressing against her chest. He touched her waist with one hand and used the gun to draw circles on her chest with the other. Sensing that she was trembling from anger, he smiled and said, "If it wasn't for the fact that we're in a rush to escape, this old man would definitely press you down in this car and teach you a good lesson." The meaning behind his words was extremely clear. At this moment, Mo Jingshan continued to increase the speed of the car while speaking in a heavy tone. "If you want to escape, don't touch her." The kidnapper coldly laughed as he pressed Jinwan down firmly. The gun was once again pressed against her temple, and he unhurriedly stepped on her back. He laughed and whistled, turning to look at Mo Jingshan. "All right, if you drive the car above 220, I won't touch her. If you're any slower, I'll rip apart her clothes. Give her a good kiss. Even if you end up dying with us, this old man can be considered to have died under a peony flower. Even if I die, I'll die happily." The car indeed increased in speed. The man driving was unusually calm. However, right now their lives were in his hands. They were only threatening each other. They had guns while he had a car. They could kill and he could bring them away. Jinwan knew that at a time like this, her half-baked skills were completely useless. She heard the kidnapper's proud whistle and felt the two kidnappers' gazes moving down her back bit by bit, as though they were sizing up her figure. Their gazes paused on her waist, and they used their hands to touch it with ill intentions. In an instant, goosebumps rose all over her body. All of a sudden, Mo Jingshan drove the car onto a large road. The two kidnappers noticed that the speed of the car had indeed reached 220 kilometers per hour, or even faster. They glanced back at the police cars that were almost out of sight, and then at the sea not far from the car window. They narrowed their eyes and asked, "Where is this?" "Binhai Road." Mo Jingshan's tone was mild. Hearing the words Binhai Road, Jinwan directly laid there unmoving, no longer resisting. A familiar scene flashed past her eyes. She remembered this place. Such a wide road, it's obvious that it's newly built. The surroundings aren't bad either. Why isn't there a single car? The kidnappers suspected that there was a trap. They pointed their guns at Jinwan as they asked sternly. This road was completed several years ago. However, because there are a few sections between this road and the expressway that haven't been demolished, it's impassable. From here to the city, we have to take a detour of 10 kilometers before we can enter. Gradually, no one is willing to take a detour on this road. Mo Jingshan's voice was calm, but there was a hint of coldness in it. Listening to his patient explanation, it was likely that he had no choice but to be so obedient because his woman was being held hostage by them. The two kidnappers immediately smiled proudly. When they looked back, they could no longer see the police cars. For a moment, they forgot about the important word, detour, that Mo Jingshan had mentioned. They did not expect that there would be an even closer entrance on this road to intercept them. However, they still pressed down harshly on Jinwan. They were certain that as long as this woman was in their hands, this man would be obedient until they sent them to a safe place. The morning sun hung from the east. Under the piercing light, the straight Binhai road quietly extended into the distance. The quiet sea had only light waves crashing against it. In this tranquility, a black ghost sped forward at an astonishing speed. Seeing that Jinwan was quietly lying there, the two kidnappers thought that she had fainted. They lowered their heads to examine her. Seeing that her eyes were closed and unmoving, they directly reached out and slapped her head harshly. Jinwan's eyes remained closed and unmoving. Fainted? The kidnappers muttered. Could it be an act? She was awake earlier. Chapter 511. The kidnapper instantly tore off the clothes on her shoulders. The thin summer dress produced a crisp tearing sound. In an instant, Jinwan's entire back was exposed, leaving only the pathetically thin buttons of her underwear sticking to her back. Jinwan remained motionless. You've really fainted? The kidnapper stared at the tender skin hidden under her clothes and was about to reach out with his blood-stained hand to touch it. At this moment, the black ghost took advantage of the moment when the two of them were distracted by the police cars and abruptly charged toward the safety barrier by the roadside. The moment the car broke through the safety barrier, Jinwan, who had not moved for a long time, suddenly opened her eyes. Before the two kidnappers could react, she raised her hand and viciously grabbed the hair of the two kidnappers, slamming their heads together harshly. Motherf asterisk Kerr, Mo Jingshan saw Jinwan's coordinated movement and suppressed his anger. The moment the two kidnappers raised their guns and were about to point at Jinwan, he directly drove the car toward the sea. In that moment of life and death, the car had already entered the water. The sudden weightlessness and shaking caused the hands of the two kidnappers to tremble. Mo Jingshan's eyes and hands were sharp. Taking advantage of the moment the two of them released their restraints on Jinwan, he turned around and slammed his hand against the back of one of the kidnappers' neck. His elbow slammed heavily against the other's face. The moment the other person stumbled, he snatched the gun from his hand. Seeing that the situation was not right, the other person rushed to grab Jinwan. Without hesitation, he shot him in the shoulder. His long arm reached out and pulled Jinwan, who was blocked by the two kidnappers, over. Jinwan no longer had any strength left. Earlier she had been accumulating strength for a long time. She and Mo Jingshan had similar experiences. Once, they had driven a car into the sea on this road to escape danger. When she heard that this was the coastal road, she immediately understood Mo Jingshan's intentions for driving here. Either they would be successfully intercepted by the police cars, or they would drive into the sea. The safety barrier here could be broken, and they could successfully drive the car into the sea. As long as they entered the sea, the two of them would definitely reveal their flaws in their frantic attempts to escape. If they were not good at swimming, it would be even easier to shake them off. The moment the man wrapped his arm around her waist and brought her back into his embrace, Jinwan's hair was still stained with blood. Her vision flickered as she watched the two kidnappers struggle over to fight. At this moment, Mo Jingshan had already created enough opportunities. His movements and awareness did not falter in the slightest. As he placed Jinwan on the passenger seat, he raised the gun with his other hand and fired several shots at the two men's wrists and shoulders. As the two men fell back against the seat, covered in blood from the fear of his accurate marksmanship, Mo Jingshan picked up the other gun and fired 2 shots at the same time, hitting the two kidnappers' legs and knees. Jinwan sat weakly on the front passenger seat. She could only hear the gunshots. She opened her eyes slightly to see the cold killing intent in Mo Jingshan's eyes. She glanced to the side and saw that although the two kidnappers were not fatally wounded, their limbs had been crippled and they were convulsing in pain as they lay on the back of the car. Blood dyed half the car and the blood flowed freely. The moment the car entered the sea, because the lock on the car door was broken, the seal was destroyed. Water quickly entered the car. Thankfully, the windows were open and Mo Jingshan managed to open the car door in time. The two kidnappers were covered in blood as they sat there paralyzed. They could only watch as the car quickly filled with water and sank into the sea. The two of them widened their eyes in fright. Their eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. Mo Jingshan carried Jin Wan, who was sitting on the passenger seat and had no strength left, out of the car. Jin Wan knew how to swim, but at this moment she did not have the ability to swim up on her own. Her entire body was held firmly in the man's embrace. The sea appeared calm, but traces of blood floated out of the car. The car sank quickly in the sea. This time the two of them escaped from the sea very quickly. Mo Jingshan swiftly carried the weak Jin Wan out of the sea. Earlier, Jin Wan did not manage to hold her breath and choked on the water. She coughed violently and leaned weakly against his embrace. She wanted to speak but could not speak. She raised her eyes to see that the police cars had surrounded them. The two kidnappers would definitely be fished out. Whether they lived or died was no longer their concern. All of Mo Jingshan's methods of dealing with the kidnappers and the places he had shot were all within the scope of legal self-defense. Before they were carried out of the sea, Mo Jingshan removed his jacket and covered her body with it. Without a word, he brought her out of the sea and carried her ashore. The sirens of police cars lingered around, and several SWAT officers came over to ask if they were all right. At this time, Yen Gu also rushed over from another car. When he saw Jin Wan in Mo Jingshan's arms, covered in blood and seawater, he asked in disbelief, "Sister Nguyen? Why is it you guys?" Mo Jingshan ignored the other police officers. He only glanced at Yen Gu as he rushed over. At the same time, he caught a glimpse of the car that Yen Gu had been driving ever since they left the Mo home last night. It was Jin Wan's car that was parked among the countless police cars. Car keys. He raised his hand, expressionlessly speaking to Yen Gu. Yen Gu was startled. Logically speaking, in such a situation, he should have immediately brought them to the police car to give their statements. After all, they had just been kidnapped. However, when he saw that Jin Wan seemed to be injured, he subconsciously pulled out the car keys. After receiving the keys, Mo Jingshan directly carried Jin Wan over. He opened the car door and placed her in the front passenger seat. Under the astonished gaze of the police officers, he expressionlessly sat in the driver's seat. Jin Wan's entire body was covered in blood. It was as though she was in pain everywhere. She sat in the front passenger seat and did not speak. She only glanced at the calm sea not far away. Almost as soon as he closed the door, Mo Jingshan abruptly stepped on the accelerator. The small white car that she usually drove at a slow speed was like an arrow released from a bow. Carrying the man's exceptionally cold gaze and Jin Wan's pain and complicated emotions, it turned back to the seaside road and drove into the distance. Mo Jingshan expressionlessly gripped the steering wheel. He did not say a single word, nor did he look at her. He only stepped heavily on the accelerator, and the frantic sound of the accelerator was as though he was shouting himself hoarse. The scenery outside the window could barely be seen clearly. It flashed past her eyes. Jin Wan did not ask him to slow down. She was also almost speechless. It was as though the moment she opened her mouth, the stench of blood would rush out from her chest. The car drove all the way, and in less than 5 minutes, they arrived at the nearest hotel invested by Shine Group. The two of them didn't say a word all the way until Mo Jingshan stopped the car, got out of the car, and pulled Jin Wan out of the passenger seat with an ugly look. He dragged her down without the slightest bit of gentleness. Chapter 512. Mo Jingshan walked in and instructed the hotel staff to immediately call the doctor over. He then heavily dragged her into the elevator and pushed her against the glass wall. The moment the elevator doors closed, he pressed her down tightly. Between gritted teeth, he asked her, "Jin Wan, did I tell you not to move?" His voice was as cold as a blade. It was no longer as calm and composed as before. It was clear that he had already lost control. Jin Wan's back slammed against the glass wall of the elevator painfully. Her wrist was also instantly gripped in pain. She stood in her spot and did not speak. Yes, he had said it before. Tell her not to move. Afterward, he mouthed a warning to her not to move. It was not the first time he had said this, but she still moved. Because in that instant, the two kidnappers had already fired at him. They wanted to kill him. She did not want this man anymore, but that did not mean that she had never loved this man. She could not watch him die. She did not want to see his wounded back and neck suffer any more harm. That was why she had rushed up, seeking an opportunity to snatch the gun away. That's right, her skills were very poor. She was not strong and she did not have the confidence. However, she had still been rash. Her rash actions had caused him more trouble. Originally, Mo Jingshan had planned to cooperate with the police to stop them at an intersection on Hai Road. In the end, because of her, he had driven the car into the ocean. She had been injured and angered the kidnappers. She had almost died in their hands. Mo Jingshan's anger had already burned away his rationality. Her silence could not extinguish his anger and instead added fuel to it. He pressed down hard on her shoulders. When the elevator stopped, he pulled her to the door, opened it and pushed her in. Jin Wan's steps were unsteady as he pushed her into the bathroom. The shower head was aimed at her head. He turned on the switch and cold water suddenly sprayed out, splashing all over her body. Jin Wan did not resist. She waited until the water in the shower gradually heated up and reached a suitable temperature, warming up her body that had been chilled by the seawater. As her body gradually regained its warmth, the scent of the two kidnappers on her body was also washed away. The blood on her head and body was also washed away. However, her heart suddenly felt a wave of boiling heat. The man stood under the water with her, his soaked shirt wrapped around him. He grabbed her chin cruelly and forced her to look at him. I've been planning for 3 years just to change the course of your life. I wanted you to live well, not to send you to your death. The man in front of her panted heavily, and every word he said pounded on her heart. Jin Wan instantly stared at him in a daze. It was as though something that had been puzzling her for a long time was finally reconnected. She stared at the man in front of her in a daze. The water in the shower kept pouring down. She stared at the man with her wet eyes and felt that all the blood in her body had frozen. Su Jilan died in exactly the same way as she did in her previous life. After Ji Menggran went missing, she was homeless and even sold by human traffickers. She almost lost her life. In her previous life, everything that had happened to her was related to the two of them, but all the paths she had taken and all the obstacles in her life seemed to have been forcibly transferred to them. The starting point of her life, divorce and return to the position she belonged to? A new life, a new life? Was that what he meant? Was that it? The man held her chin. I should have stopped you from coming back. I should have used the most vicious and unpleasant words in the world to attack you. Even if I hurt your heart to pieces, as long as you give up, as long as you obediently live a happy life with a new person, as long as you don't appear in front of me again. Mo Jingshan's eyes were almost dyed red from the fear and anger that he had almost personally watched her send herself to her death. Jin Wan had seen him lose control before, but she had never seen him lose control like this. Hadn't he always been very calm? Damn that calmness. He stared at her and asked, I'm willing to bear all the separation even if you hate me for the rest of your life as long as you learn how to live a better life. As long as it's for your own good, I'm willing to do anything. But why did you come back? The sprinkler gradually turned on and more water poured down. For a moment, Jin Wan couldn't see his face clearly through the curtain of water. She could only stand under the water as if she had been petrified, letting the warm water wash away all the coldness from head to toe. Mo Jingshan was full of anger, but he had nowhere to vent it. Seeing her standing motionless under the water with a blank look on her face, his reason was finally completely annihilated. He picked her up and pressed her against the cold wall behind the curtain of water. You'll never learn to be obedient, will you? You don't know how to cherish your life, do you? What on earth do you want from me? Jin Wan, what else do you want from me? He gritted his teeth. His breath was very heavy, brushing against her face. His eyes were bloodshot and his whole body was trembling. He had never been so embarrassed before. Even when he was in Cambodia, even when he was covered in blood and almost killed in that car accident, he had never been so embarrassed. He peeled away all the forbearance and suffering word by word, as if he was peeling away the cruel shell layer by layer. But she was right. The past was the past. Things were different now. She didn't even want to know the reason why he forced her to divorce and cruelly and heartlessly pushed her away. So what if he knew? He was prepared to be alone for the rest of his life. He just wanted to watch her live well from a distance. He wanted to see her learn to grow up, become strong and gradually become indestructible. He wanted to see her not die one day at the age of 30, nor would she suddenly disappear one day because of the change in her life. He just wanted her to live a safe and stable life. But she insisted on appearing in front of him again and again, making him unable to bear it and making him lose control several times. He wanted to approach her but didn't know how to pull back the woman he had hurt with his own hands. He wanted to recover this lost land of hers, but he knew that she had been hurt so badly that she had almost forgotten her feelings. For the first time in Mo Jingshan's life, he didn't know what to do with her. He was helpless. The sound of water from the shower continued to ring in his ears. Jinwan stared at him with her black and white eyes. She opened her mouth but couldn't say a word. She suddenly smiled, and the smile on her lips grew wider. She seemed calm, but her eyes were fixed on him. She did not shout herself hoarse, nor did she show any anger, fear, or doubt. She only stared at him with a pair of red eyes, and her face was covered with droplets of water. It was hard to tell whether she was crying or laughing. Mo Jingshan felt as if he had been hit in the head with a stick. At this moment, a string in his brain seemed to have completely broken. It was as if all reason had been burned away. The man's eyes were bloodshot. He suddenly lowered his head and kissed her hard. Chapter 513. This kiss was too wanton and entangled. Mo Jingshan seemed to have been tied down by reason and responsibility for many years. After she returned to High City, thousands of strings were cut off by her one by one. Now it was finally the last string. The man had nowhere to vent his anger. The fear of almost watching her die sublimated in the entangled kiss. He had never tasted this kind of feeling in his life. It was so difficult to take back everything that he had pushed away with his own hands after all the dust had settled. He didn't even know where to start. At this moment, his emotions were completely out of control. He cast aside everything in the past and no longer had any worries. Love was love. He had to take back what he had lost. The unreserved, passionate kiss hit her lips and all her senses. Jinwan was firmly imprisoned against the wall by him. The sound of water was in her ears. She didn't know whether her face was tears or water. She could barely breathe and all the pain in her body was numb. All her senses had stopped, and she could only feel the man holding her tightly against the wall. In the past 3 years, Mo Jingshan had lived like an ascetic monk. He had planned for her to live a life that had been ruined by others. Finally, with his help, he had succeeded. He had completely let go and allowed her to grow on her own. He did not visit her, nor did he care about her. He had restrained himself and disciplined himself. In the end, this woman's return had broken his vows. He was like a child who was experiencing feelings for the first time. He carefully approached her and was pushed away. He approached her again and was pushed away again. His rationality was still there, telling him that this woman would never be able to return to his arms again, telling him that he should let go, but his body was still not under his control. He controlled himself not to approach but saw her shining in the seaside resort. He saw her frown and smile at others but coldly keep her distance from him, the person who used to be closest to her. He didn't want to agree to the government's stadium reconstruction project. However, when he saw MN Group's name, he signed the agreement on the document that he should have refused. He was talking to a business partner in a cafe when he saw another man's mother holding her hand and smiling at her as though she was looking at her daughter-in-law. He saw her wearing a jade bracelet on her white wrist. After dinner that night, he somehow drove to her place. Before the power went out, he went upstairs only to see that she hadn't returned home yet. When he looked down, he saw that the man had stolen a kiss on her face with the help of the light from the phone in the car. When he saw her stunned expression as she sat stiffly in the passenger seat, it was very vivid. All his self-control was almost ignited in an instant. He lost control more than once. Every time he lost control hidden under the calm surface, he gradually lost control. The woman he treasured the most became the woman he couldn't touch. This was the lips he had longed for a long time but could only taste several times under the pretext of being drunk. Her soft lips were like his heart when he loved her. It was impossible to make up for the 3 years she had missed in one kiss. Jinwan's shoulder-length hair was scattered over her shoulders, and a few strands were wrapped around her neck like seaweed. Her breathing was erratic and she struggled to breathe in his arms. The man's kiss was almost ferocious. In the bathroom, he pressed her against the wall and tore off the last piece of clothing on her body. When the water was steaming, the endless desire seemed to be ready to explode. Everything could no longer be hidden and everything did not want to stop. Just when Mo Jingshan couldn't bear it any longer and was about to have sex with her, the woman in his arms suddenly softened. He paused, and when he saw her close her eyes and almost fall down, he took a step back and stretched out his arm, and she fell forward weakly in his arms. She was injured. Under the cover of the water and long hair, the bleeding wound on her head could barely be seen. However, her body couldn't bear it and she fainted. Mo Jingshan's expression was cold as he carried her up and walked out of the bathroom. Jinwan's body was soaked in water and blood. The hotel staff had already called the doctor under his orders, and the doctor was knocking on the door cautiously. The doctor's treatment of the wound was very painful. The butt of the handgun was not that sharp. Her head had only been smashed and it was like a knock. There was still some blood. Furthermore, when Jin Wan was brought out of the sea, she didn't have much strength and couldn't even hold her breath in the water. As a result, she choked on the seawater and felt uncomfortable in her throat and lungs. Jin Wan quietly lay on the bed, allowing the doctor to treat the wound on her head. When she turned over, someone placed an ice pack on the swollen side of her face, causing her to furrow her brows in pain. She frowned in her sleep. "Brother Mo, I'm sorry." Even when everything was over, Jin Wan's dreams were still of the salty and cold seawater. She saw Mo Jingshan pushing her out of the deep sea with a cold expression again and again. She saw the moment she was finally pushed out of the sea, Mo Jingshan smiled and sank back into the sea. "No, don't." Jin Wan struggled in her dreams and charged back into the sea. She swam wildly in the endless sea but couldn't reach him no matter how hard she tried. She swam toward him with all her might, only to see a pitch-black hole in the depths of the sea. Mo Jingshan stared at her as though she was a stranger, and then he was instantly sucked into the black hole. She quickly swam over. The moment she entered the black hole, the world seemed to have been restored to its brightness. She saw herself dying in the prison. The moment she fell unconscious, a figure suddenly rushed in. She finally saw him clearly. That person was Mo Jingshan. It was actually Mo Jingshan, who had suddenly returned from America after not seeing him for 10 years. He carried her body that still had a trace of warmth. Ignoring the group of prison guards who were obedient to him, he carried her out expressionlessly. Jin Wan watched this scene in a daze. She wanted to follow him out but was blocked by an invisible barrier. She could only see the man's figure gradually moving further and further away. The light changed in an instant, and it suddenly turned into a quiet ward. In the ward, she lay silently on the white bed. Mo Jingshan stood by the bedside, silently watching her body that had already cooled to the point of not having any warmth at all. Jin Wan couldn't walk over and could only watch the man standing by the bed from afar. His gaze was so gentle that it reminded her of the 10 months of Mo Jingshan. He looked at the 10 years that belonged to her, and his gaze was clear and cold. Chapter 514. Car accident? How many months did he wake up? Jin Wan stared in disbelief at the silent, cold man standing by the bed until she saw the man's fingers gently stroke her eyebrows and eyes as if he were really the 10-month-old Mo Jingshan standing by the bed. She could no longer hear what Ji Menggran said. Jin Wan looked at Mo Jingshan's face, which gradually became blurry. She couldn't see anything clearly, but the car accident Ji Menggran said happened 10 years later in Los Angeles and he slept for several months. It happened so much earlier in this life. Mo Jingshan, who had promised to leave her world, suddenly returned to High City from America and rushed to the prison as soon as he came back. It was as though he wanted to stop her death. It was as though he already knew everything, but in the end, he could not stop her from taking her last breath. He kept his promise. He didn't come back for 10 years, but he didn't marry for 10 years. After waking up from the car accident, he suddenly rushed back to High City. Could it be that the car accident gave him the memory of what she experienced 10 years ago after she was reborn? So when Mo Jingshan woke up from the same experience, he also remembered everything? It was just that it happened many years earlier. So he really knew everything. Her experience, her death, the long 10 years that they didn't meet because of her stubbornness and his promise. He knew everything. There was only white light in front of her. She couldn't see Mo Jingshan, couldn't see her cold body on the bed, and could only walk forward aimlessly. It was as though Mo Jingshan's voice was speaking by her ear. He lay down by her side, holding her ice-cold hand with his. Gently, she could not tell what he was saying by her ear. She wanted to come closer but couldn't. She wanted to speak, but she felt an invisible whirlpool sucking her away. Then there were countless strange dreams, so bizarre that she couldn't connect them. Sometimes she was in the past life, sometimes she was in the present. The scene of her dying in prison was suddenly overlapped with the scene of Su Jilan falling in prison. The scene of her homeless standing on the street with a blank face was overlapped with Ji Menggran's figure, until they were completely covered. It seemed that all the ruined traces of her life that had been caused by people had been replaced by these initiators. Jin Wan slept for a day and a night in confusion. When it was time to eat and apply medicine, the man would dig her out from under the blanket, feed her and apply medicine. She was half awake and could not distinguish reality from her dream. She only felt that the man was disturbing her dream when he woke her up to feed her. In the beginning she would frown and throw a tantrum, refusing to eat. She wanted to continue sleeping, but it was useless after a few times. When she refused to eat, the man was even more stubborn than her. If she only cared about sleeping and refused to eat, she would be the one suffering if she did not cooperate. Therefore, when Jinwan was dug up in a half-awake state, she had no choice but to eat obediently and let the man apply medicine or ice packs to her face. The next day Jinwan finally woke up, but when she opened her eyes and looked at the familiar and strange environment, she was stunned for a long time, wondering if she was still dreaming. This place, Aolan International? Coincidentally, when she woke up, a doctor came to check on her body. Jinwan weakly closed her eyes and allowed the doctor to examine her. When the doctor left, she lay on the bed, staring blankly at the man who had just sent the doctor away and returned to the bedroom. The moment she met Mo Jingshan's gaze, Jinwan finally woke up from her dream. Everything that had happened before she fainted rushed back to her mind. She originally did not speak, but Mo Jingshan spoke up. "You're awake? You slept for almost 2 days. You didn't even eat properly when you were half awake. Come and eat first." Jinwan did not have time to ask, wasn't she brought to a hotel near Binhai Road by him? Why was she at Aolan International when she woke up? The man directly walked out of the bedroom, leaving her with a view of his back in a white shirt. Jinwan? She did not move from the bed. After waiting for a while, the man returned. However, Mo Jingshan actually said that she was not allowed to eat in the bedroom. He said that aside from the injury on her head, her other injuries were not serious. After sleeping for 2 days, her strength was severely lacking and she had to wake up to eat. Furthermore, she had to go to the restaurant to eat. Jinwan remained unmoving. "My head hurts. I don't have any strength." The man glanced at her, walked over, and directly lifted the quilt. "I'll carry you over." Jinwan's face was indeed slightly pale. The moment the quilt was lifted, she abruptly lowered her head to look at the man's shirt she was wearing. She had been washed clean, and her body still smelled faintly of shower gel. Her hair was also fresh and clean. Aside from the shirt that belonged to him, she did not even have any underwear. So, while she was unconscious, he not only brought her back to Aolan International, but also bathed and changed her clothes for her? Jinwan did not move. "I'm not feeling well. I haven't woken up yet. I want to lie down for a while more and—" She was not wearing any other clothes. Regardless of whether those dreams were real or not, the two of them were already divorced. It was really inappropriate for her to wear so little in front of him. The woman lying on the bed stared at him with her clear black and white eyes. She insisted on lying on the bed and did not move. She even had the intention of pulling the quilt back over her body. The moment she pulled the quilt back over her body, the man silently lifted the quilt and threw it aside. He scooped the person on the bed into his arms and carried her out. "Sleep after eating. I've only fed you some porridge these days. You have to eat." The moment Jinwan was carried, her body stiffened, but she really did not have any strength to resist. She could only widen her eyes and say, "Mo Jingshan, don't you have any clothes here that I can wear myself?" The man said indifferently, "Before you returned the key to Aolan International to me 3 years ago, didn't you take away all of your things in advance?" Jinwan. "So this is really Aolan International? Why did you bring me here?" The man was unperturbed. "The hotel is not suitable for recuperation." Jinwan rolled her eyes at him. The hotel was not suitable for recuperation? Then why didn't he say that it was not suitable for her to be violated when she was injured? If she hadn't fainted in time, he would have turned into a beast in the bathroom. But fortunately, her injury was not serious. She was hit by the butt of the gun. She should be thankful that she did not lose her memory or become a fool. Jinwan couldn't help but touch her hair, wondering if the doctor would shave off a piece of her hair to make it easier for her to apply medicine. She was worried, but when she touched her hair, she was relieved to find that not a single strand of hair was missing. Chapter 5:15. When she was carried to the dining table, Jinwan looked at the food on the table, which was obviously just ordered from a restaurant. "Jinwan, am I not a patient? How can I eat such oily food?" The man put her on the dining chair. "They're all vegetarian dishes. They're not so oily." Jinwan didn't speak anymore but reached out and tugged the hem of her shirt down hard, trying to cover as much of her thighs as possible. When the man caught a glimpse of her movement, she still kept a straight face, but after all, she still had a lot of questions in her heart. She picked up the chopsticks and asked, "By the way, did Su Jilan's death really have something to do with you? Eat." Jinwan? She glanced at him again. She was indeed hungry. No matter what, she had to eat. She was not in a hurry to talk about anything. She lifted her chopsticks and began to eat, but she only ate a little of the dishes. Although these dishes looked good and tasted delicious, perhaps because she had just woken up, she could not eat much. As she ate, she lost interest in these dishes. In addition to these vegetarian dishes, there was also a very light steamed fish. After tasting the fish, she felt that although it tasted good, it was not good enough. She couldn't help saying, "Nowadays, the chefs of the hotels near Aolan International are not very good." For some reason, she felt that the food sitting here shouldn't taste so bad, but she couldn't figure out why she felt this way. Mo Jingshan scooped soup for her. Hearing her words, he looked up at her and said indifferently, "I was busy taking care of you when you were in a coma. Do you expect me to make time to cook for you?" Jinwan bit the chopsticks and fell silent. All right. Every time she lived in Aolan International, Mo Jingshan would cook for her even if he came back late from working overtime. Every time she came here, she could almost always eat the delicious food he made. In the U Garden, she had Auntie Chen to cook for her. In other places, she might order takeout or cook for herself, but in Aolan International, she often ate his cooking. It turned out that the strange feeling she had just now was just because of this place. The man put the soup in front of her and didn't talk to her anymore. Jinwan looked at the cold and indifferent man opposite her. She recalled those strange and dazzling dreams and slowly pursed her lips. Let's not talk about those dreams for the time being. What he said about returning to the starting point and about life's trajectory could also be put aside for the time being. But for the past 2 days, he hadn't gone to the company and had been taking care of her? She heard that after he took over Shine Group, he almost never took a day off. This man now looked more unreasonable than before, but he was especially patient with her. She lowered her head to eat. Perhaps to show that she was not really unable to eat because of the gap, she simply ate a big bowl in one go. Although she felt much better, she was still badly bullied by the 2 kidnappers and slept for 2 days. It was impossible for her body to recover in a short time. She sat at the dining table without moving, but in her heart, she had already decided to go back to bed and have a good sleep, waiting for her physical and mental state to recover. But it did not seem appropriate for her to continue living in Orange International. After all, they had been divorced for so long. Jinwan didn't think she was a vengeful person before, but when it came to Mo Jingshan, she found that although she was not obsessed with the past, nor would she tear her heart out and make a scene, she was still very vengeful. "My cell phone and everything in my bag should have fallen into the sea with your car. Now I can't contact anyone. You should have a cell phone here. Can you lend it to me to make a call?" she asked. The man stared at her for 10 seconds. When Jinwan was about to explain why she wanted to borrow his cell phone, he said lightly, "Stay here until your wound is completely healed. I'll send someone to inform your company." Jinwan? She hadn't even said the reason. Mo Jingshan walked up to her and lowered his eyes to look at her still pale face. "Go back to the bedroom to rest. There are no clothes for you here. I'll ask someone to buy them from the mall and buy some daily necessities you can use, okay?" Jinwan sat at the dining table, pursed her lips and said after a moment, "You can't have no underwear left here. Let's not talk about buying clothes. Is it appropriate for me to stay here wearing your shirt without any underwear?" Mo Jingshan, why not? Mo Jingshan, why not? Seeing Jinwan's angry expression, he seemed to be helpless and said in a low voice, "Then I'll go look for it for you. See if you forgot to take 1 or 2 with you when you left." Jinwan, ask Mo Jingshan to help her find her underwear? Not to mention that the 2 of them no longer had a legal relationship. Even before the divorce, he didn't seem to have done this kind of thing. Seeing that she didn't answer, the man turned to the bedroom. Seeing that he was really going to look for it, Jinwan got up. "I'll find it myself." Mo Jingshan glanced at her, raised his chin and pointed to the bedroom, saying indifferently, "Go ahead." Why did the topic inexplicably change from borrowing his cell phone to looking for underwear? Jinwan looked at his handsome features and brows. Her expression was heavy, but she still unwillingly and quickly walked toward the sun. As she walked, she continued to pull down the hem of the shirt, wondering if Mo Jingshan did it on purpose. He clearly had a shirt with a longer hem than this one. She had worn it in the past. He was tall and had long legs. When she wasn't wearing high heels, he was more than a head taller than she was, so his shirts usually covered more than half of her thighs. However, this shirt was clearly not the longest. It barely covered the top of her thighs. She couldn't pull it down even an inch. She pulled the shirt and walked into the bedroom with a dark face. She opened the wardrobe, pulled open the drawer and rummaged through it. Sure enough, none of her things were left, not even in the corner. 3 years ago, before she returned the key to him, she did come to take everything away. But at that time she did it very quickly. She couldn't have left nothing behind. But now, it seemed that she was really serious at that time. Indeed, she didn't leave anything behind. The man didn't stop her from rummaging through the drawer. He stood in front of the bedroom door with one hand in his trouser pocket and looked at her indifferently. I've asked someone to buy it for you. None of your clothes will be missing. 2 hours won't matter. Just put up with it for a while, okay? Seeing that there was really nothing, Jinwan pushed the drawer back heavily and reluctantly agreed with an ugly look on her face. But she couldn't keep her legs bare, so she opened the wardrobe and took out a pair of loose, soft trousers from it. Of course it was Mo Jingshan's. She hid behind the wardrobe door and put on the trousers. When she came out from behind the wardrobe door smugly, she suddenly met Mo Jingshan's eyes and paused. Chapter 5:16. Sure enough, Mo Jingshan's eyes stopped on the trousers she was wearing and then looked her up and down. A moment later he smiled faintly. Jinwan closed the wardrobe door speechlessly, feeling that it was not wise to stay in the same room with him. Now she was dressed like this without a bag, cell phone or any ID. For some reason she felt as if she had lost her freedom and became shorter. Even if she wanted to talk to him, she seemed to have lost her courage. She put her hand on the wardrobe door and suddenly asked, "Who did you send to buy clothes for me? Shinmu? Won't it be too inconvenient for him to buy things like underwear?" The man answered casually, "Auntie Chen." Jinwan calmly made an "oh" sound, turned to sit down on the bed for a rest and did not continue to ask. She had just taken 2 steps when she suddenly stopped and turned to look at him. "Auntie Chen?" The man's eyes fell on the trousers she was wearing, looked at the trousers that were too long and stepped on by her feet, and said indifferently, "Auntie Chen's youngest son was admitted to High City University. She came from the countryside to accompany him. She lives near the university and has nothing to do, so I asked her to find time to clean every day." After leaving the Yu Garden, Jinwan thought she would never see Auntie Chen again. But she did not expect that Auntie Chen's current job was still with Mo Jingshan and the Mo family. This was good. First, Auntie Chen's life and salary were guaranteed, and second, Auntie Chen was trustworthy and suitable for long-term employment. She was relieved that Auntie Chen was going to buy clothes for her. She didn't say anything, sat down on the bed, raised her legs and rolled up the long trousers saying, "I may have to borrow your cell phone. I have so many certificates in my bag that I need to apply for. Many of them are related to the company. I can't be careless. This kind of thing can't be delayed." With that she raised her eyes and said, "And your car? You didn't change it 3 years ago. Now it finally has to be scrapped, right?" Hearing the man's calm voice, Jinwan looked at him, only to see that he did not intend to continue talking about the car and had already handed her a cell phone. Jinwan glanced at it and stood up to receive the phone. She poked at the numbers of several company employees and Xiaoba that she could barely remember, saying, "I still have to apply for a new SIM card. Auntie Chen has already gone. When she returns with the clothes, she will bring the replacement card over." In an instant, even the last reason to leave here was gone. Jinwan held the phone in silence for a moment, lowered her head, and continued to dial the number without speaking. When she was on the phone, Mo Jingshan turned and walked out. She sat on the bed and called Xiaoba, explaining why she had been missing for the past 2 days, and asked them to get the documents and certificates in her bag that had been destroyed by the seawater. After that, she put down the phone and looked at the black cell phone in her hand. Suddenly, he felt that all the things that he had been worried about since he woke up had been explained. His heart also calmed down. She could almost hear the words the man had said to her as he pinched her chin in hatred when he pushed her against the wall of the hotel bathroom. "I've been planning for 3 years just to change the course of your life, to let you live well, not to let you die so easily." She lowered her eyes, put down the phone, and then sat on the bed for a while. Finally she got up and went out. She rolled up the trousers that had grown a lot. Now she didn't have to step on the trouser legs anymore, and it was much easier for her to walk. She walked out of the bedroom in a man's shirt and trousers. She didn't find slippers in the bedroom. When she got out of bed, Mo Jingshan carried her to dinner, so she came out barefoot. After walking out, she was about to ask him when the man's low, indifferent voice rang above her head. "Put on your shoes." Jinwan paused and was about to say that she had taken away all her shoes here 3 years ago. How could there be any shoes for her to wear? The man just pointed to the door with his chin. She followed his finger and saw that he had taken out a pair of new gray men's slippers. They were his, new and unused. She looked at them attentively, walked over to put them on, and came back in the pair of slippers that were much larger than her feet. In recent years she had been very particular about her appearance because of her work. At this moment she was wearing a loose shirt, loose trousers and a pair of men's slippers. She looked unbelievably casual, and because her hair was only shoulder length she was clean and had no style at all. She looked like a high school student who stole adults' clothes to wear. She looked neither fish nor fowl, but she had a different kind of charm. Seeing her like this, the man smiled faintly. When people were in a familiar environment, they would subconsciously immerse themselves in the memories of this environment and even feel that nothing had changed, but at this moment, seeing Mo Jingshan's smile, Jinwan couldn't calm down even if she wanted to. She turned her head stiffly, but her expression was serious. Mo Jingshan. He sat on the sofa opposite her, picked up the glass kettle on the coffee table, and poured her a glass of warm water. What do you want to say? You'll answer whatever I ask? You won't lie to me? The man put the glass on the side of the coffee table closest to her, glanced at her, and said nothing. She approached him again and stared into his eyes. There are still many things I don't understand. Do I have a second chance at life but I can't change the course of my life at will? If I don't do something I'll still die when I'm 30 years old in a few years? He didn't seem to care much about the process she had never understood. He just said casually, now as long as you live a good life, don't risk your life for others, eat regularly and keep exercising, I promise you'll live a long life. So, Su Jilan's death and what happened in the 2 years after Ji Mingran's disappearance have something to do with you? The man just glanced at her and waited for her next words. How did you do it? What do you know? Then are you dead? Did you die once just like me? Or did you just wake up with those memories? What else did you know when I didn't know? Chapter 517. Jinwan was puzzled. So divorce is just the way I have to go back to where I started. What about after the divorce? Now Su Jilan has been punished. She's dead but I'm alive. Should I continue to not see you for 10 years and have nothing to do with you for the rest of my life? Mo Jingshan was silent for a while. You can choose your own life now. What should be over has been over. You can do whatever you want. After saying that, the man looked at her. It's a good choice to be Mrs. Mo again. Mo Jingshan looked at her. His calm expression perfectly covered up his uneasiness when he said this. He had been prepared to pay the price, but at this moment, it would be difficult for him to take it back. He knew her too well. Looking at his calm expression, Jinwan remembered the look on his face when he said that he was dead. She said coldly, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought a lot just now but I didn't think about it. Since I can choose my own life now, I can let go of everything else including you, Mo Jingshan, can't I?" It was the expected answer. Mo Jingshan didn't show any disappointment, but his eyes were deep, and the emotions in his eyes fluctuated for a while. How are you going to let me go? No matter what the reason was, it was so cruel for him to break up with her that Jinwan didn't want to forgive him. Jinwan was still cold. Fall in love again, marry another man, say goodbye to the past, move to a new starting point and then move to a new peak. What do you think? The man looked at her for a moment, narrowed his eyes slightly and chuckled. Marry another man? Jinwan straightened her back. I've lived 2 lives and been entangled with the same man for 10 years. There's no need for me to be entangled with him anymore. Anyway, I've already left him. A good horse doesn't go back to the grass. I can only thank you for giving me a new life. When I get married again you can stand with my father. My new husband and I will respect you as our second parent and bow deeply to you. That's how I repay you, isn't it? Mo Jingshan watched her. Right now your words are filled with daggers. Can your heart feel better? There was no change in his expression, but he could feel the chill in his eyes when he heard her say that she was going to bow to him as if he was her second parent and that she was going to walk to him with her new husband. Jinwan kept a straight face and turned to the bedroom. My head still hurts. I'm going back to the bedroom to sleep for a while. When Auntie Chin brings me my clothes and my SIM card, please wake me up, COMO. If you can ask Auntie Chin to buy me a new cell phone, I'd be very grateful. After all, people can't do anything without a cell phone. I'm the head of MN Group, and I can't just be a boss who doesn't do anything. After that, he entered the bedroom and closed the door. Mo Jingshan didn't say anything until Jinwan lay back on the bed. She lowered her head to look at the shirt and the man's trousers, and then at the sunshine outside the window. She frowned gloomily, got up and drew the curtains. The bedroom was plunged into darkness and then she lay down again. Jinwan had thought that she couldn't fall asleep because all kinds of things were entangled in her mind. Maybe this was right. After all, life couldn't be restarted in vain. There were always some trajectories and experiences that couldn't be easily reversed. Then what on earth did he do in the past few years to transfer all the fatal flaws in her to Su Jilan and the others? After she died, in those days that she didn't know, he must have done or known something. She had slept for a day and a night, and in total she had slept for 2 days. After she woke up, she had been here eating and dressing. She didn't consume any energy at all, so she couldn't fall asleep. But soon after she closed her eyes and let her imagination run wild, she fell asleep in the faint familiar smell of the bed. When she woke up again it was dark. It was not noon when she fell asleep. Jinwan got up from the bed feeling much recovered. When she walked out of the bedroom she saw 2 bags of clothes on the sofa and a small paper bag, in which was the replaced SIM card. Where is Auntie Chin? Jinwan thought she could see Auntie Chin. When Auntie Chin came back at noon she saw you sleeping soundly, so she didn't disturb you and left. She'll come back tomorrow morning. If you want to see her, see you tomorrow morning. The man came out of the study at this time, his tone indifferent and calm. Jinwan glanced at him. Forget it. Anyway, she's in High City. If I have a chance, I'll invite her and her little son to dinner near High City University. I'll see her sooner or later. I'll change my clothes and leave. With that, she picked up the clothes on the sofa and the replaced SIM card. When she was about to turn back to the bedroom, she thought for a moment and looked back on the sofa. Don't you have a cell phone? COMO has thrown a car worth tens of millions into the sea. You can't be so stingy as to not ask someone to buy a cell phone for me, can you? He said indifferently, I'll go buy one with you after I've recovered. Jinwan looked at the man's displeasing composure. It was as though no matter what she said or made a fuss, he would treat it as her throwing a tantrum because of the anger she had suffered in the past. He was patient and calm. She snorted coldly. That won't be necessary. I don't plan to recover here. After changing my clothes, I'll go downstairs and take a taxi. The man's voice was slightly cold. Without a cell phone you can't contact anyone. Without ID or money, you're going downstairs to take a taxi at such a late hour. Are you waiting for someone to rob you? Jinwan. He lowered his eyes to look at her and said lightly, if you don't feel comfortable living in Aolan International, I'll send you back. The premise is that your head was smashed and you'll have headaches in the next few days. You can't be alone at home. It's not impossible for me to stay at your place. Jinwan, then forget it. She lived so peacefully in Yuehu Bay. She couldn't let him know where she lived now. Is it so serious? She raised her hand and touched her head again. In fact, if she didn't touch it, she wouldn't feel any pain. She just felt some pain when she touched the wound with her hand. She had a feeling that Mo Jingshan deliberately said it was serious. If it was really serious, she would have been sent to the hospital. It was impossible for her to just stay here to recover. Jinwan saw him glance at her swollen face and head and stared at her with his dark eyes. It's very serious. Chapter 518. Jinwan changed her clothes, came out of the bedroom and met Mo Jingshan's eyes. Mo Jingshan silently looked at the woman's clear eyes as she stared at him. She was not entangled in the past, angry or hateful. In fact, he was not sure whether she would forgive him for this reason. Jinwan saw that his face was indifferent and calm. She didn't speak, straightened her collar expressionlessly and said, Can I trouble Mo to lend me 100 yuan? She couldn't borrow a cell phone, so she suddenly asked for money, and it was only 100 yuan? Mo Jingshan glanced at her, but Jinwan had already walked to the temporary hanger in front of the door and rummaged through his clothes inside and out, but didn't find his wallet. Then she remembered that in the sea not only her bag and the things in her bag were gone, but also the things in his shirt and trousers. It had only been 2 days and she had been taking care of him at home. She probably hadn't applied for a new ID card, and she probably didn't have time to buy a new wallet. But since he often went back to Aolan International, he had the habit of carrying some paper money with him, so there should be at least 100 yuan here. Thinking of this, Jinwan turned to look in the other rooms. If she couldn't find the money, she would go to the study. Anyway, she could get the money and take a taxi back to Yuehu Bay. However, as soon as she turned around, she was caught by a strong arm and taken back in an instant. Mo Jingshan pressed her against the hanger, clasped her waist and forcibly locked her in his arms, his voice low and heavy. You haven't recovered. Do you have to go? The sudden intimacy and the man's breath blew over her face. Jinwan's heart skipped a beat. She tried to push the man's arm away, but it didn't budge at all. She immediately slapped his arm with a cold face and turned to him, saying angrily, Mo Jingshan, when I was unconscious, you helped me bathe and change my clothes. I didn't have a choice, so I didn't argue with you. But now I can stand on my own and I'm not seriously injured. There's no need for me to stay here. Besides, do you have to hold me like this again and again? Let me go. He whispered in her ear. You know I bathed you. Can you count how many times I've seen you and slept with you? You're so angry just because I hugged you. I've been so careful all these years, but in the end I've raised an ungrateful wretch? Did this have anything to do with ungrateful wretch? Jinwan put on a straight face and couldn't break free from his grip. She could only try to step back, but the clothes rack behind her couldn't support her. She only took one step back and then stopped. She raised her hand and tried to push him away, but she didn't succeed. To prevent her from being hit by the clothes rack when she leaned back, Mo Jingshan put his arm around her waist and held her in his arms. Jinwan only felt that she was suddenly lifted up, her feet off the ground, and he easily turned around and carried her to the sofa. The man sat down, put her on his thigh, buckled her waist and moved his handsome face closer. His warm breath almost brushed against her cheek. "I'm afraid it's a little difficult to find a note here." The man's voice was so husky that it seemed he was coaxing her. "Only you can show off in front of me. You've already shown your cold face. You can do whatever you want to take revenge, but you can't leave before you recover. At least, you can't leave until your head doesn't hurt anymore and the doctor confirms that you're fine." How could Jinwan be obedient just because of a few words from the man? He even said she was cold and pretentious. She was about to argue with him, but when she turned her head, she was kissed by the man who lowered his head. Jinwan shuddered. It was not the first time that she had been kissed by Mo Jingshan in the past few months after returning to China, but the previous times were either in the dark or when he was drunk, or when she was in a coma and he almost swallowed her alive because he lost control of himself. However, when both of them were sober and everything was peaceful, such a kiss was too intimate for her and even challenged her endurance. After a few seconds, she came back to herself, raised her hand to push the man's chest, and almost reflexively tried to withdraw from his arms. She couldn't push him away and the kiss deepened. The man held the back of her head and turned the kiss into a deep one. Their lips and tongues intertwined and she couldn't push him away. She only felt the blood all over her body surging wildly, and her scalp was numb. All the familiar and strange passions surrounded her. After pushing for a long time and almost exhausting most of her strength, she could only limp in his arms with difficulty breathing. Her fingers trembled and she clung to the man's clothes. Jinwan's consciousness was almost muddled. The man held her face with one hand, his warm fingertips stroking the skin of her cheek, and his other hand moved down from the back of her head. When she felt the man's hand under her clothes, she finally shivered, and the chaos in her mind dissipated. She sobered up and pushed him hard. Mo Jingshan didn't intend to let go, but when they were immersed in each other's embrace, he was no longer restrained and guarded against her. This time Mo Jingshan was really pushed away by her, but only by the distance of letting go. Jinwan gasped and was about to jump away from his lap. Her pale face was a little red, perhaps because of the kiss just now. This man either stood still and watched her every move calmly without any preparation to attack, or once he was ready to attack, was he ready to take the enemy's head? She angrily tugged down the corner of her clothes that had just been lifted. She took a step back from his lap and almost fell back on the coffee table. Her legs were soft from the kiss and she struggled to stand up. She was so angry that she said incoherently, "You only kiss and hug me here. How can I continue to live here? If I stay here to recuperate, I don't know how much you will take advantage of me. You can kiss me, but why did you put your hand under my clothes? If I really gave you a good look, would you still?" Realizing what she had said in anger, Jinwan's face was even redder, and her eyes were full of anger. Her hair was a little messy on her shoulders and she looked angry and displeased. When he kissed her just now, her breath was uneven and her cheeks were red. The man looked at her. He didn't intend to do anything to her, but seeing her angry look, his blood surged and his eyes darkened. Chapter 519. Jinwan was about to say something angrily when she saw that the man's eyes seemed to be burning with a fire that was even stronger than hers. Like a prairie fire, it almost swallowed her reflection in his eyes. She immediately swallowed back the words that were about to come out of her mouth. Mo Jingshan's eyes, they were deep and dark. When he stared at her, it was as though she was naked. The fire in his eyes was so intense that it could almost burn her to ashes in an instant. Jinwan's heart instinctively trembled. This man was no longer the man she had flirted with and pounced on when she had just been reborn. He completely knew everything about her. He was the Mo Jingshan she was familiar with and extremely intimate with, but also the Mo Jingshan who had promised her that he would never appear again. He was calmer and sharper than the Mo Jingshan she was familiar with. He was familiar but also a little frightening. Jinwan's heart beat violently under his gaze. For some reason, she felt as though everything about her could be easily peeled away by him. This sense of danger made her heart palpitate and panic. By the sofa in front of him, she subconsciously wanted to run away. Mo Jingshan stretched out his arms and pressed her body, which was blocked by the coffee table, into the soft sofa. He bent down and kissed her again. It was no longer the lingering and hot kiss that seemed to melt the tip of the iceberg in her heart. Instead, it was an extremely entangled tongue kiss. When Jinwan panted and tried hard to push him away, he kissed her from her chin and cheeks to the back of her ear. He kissed her sensitive ear, which he was familiar with, and his warm breath landed on her ear. The man's hoarse voice was pressed against her ear. He held her waist through her clothes and said softly, "I can't really give you a chance to find a new husband to be an eyesore in front of me. Being overly calm is useless to you. I might as well be more shameless. What's the big deal about putting my hand under your clothes? Which part of your body haven't I touched?" The sensitive part of Jinwan's ear was constantly touched. She couldn't help curling up under him. Her body was tense and she put her hand between their bodies, but he still moved it to the other side of her body. After more than 3 years, Mo Jingshan clearly knew the most sensitive parts of her body very well. The first was behind her ear. She hadn't been intimate with any man for a long time. In the past 3 years, except for being accidentally kissed on the cheek by Mr. Vince, no other man had had any chance to be intimate with her. All sensitive parts were suddenly teased. Her nerves were sensitive and trembled. She couldn't help clutching his clothes and turning her head desperately to avoid him. "Don't?" Mo Jingshan raised his eyebrows slightly. He probably knew her better than she knew herself. He knew her sensitive parts, but he didn't expect that she was even more sensitive than 3 years ago. With a touch, her body trembled and her voice was almost forced to cry. Perhaps because Jinwan had been giving him a hard look since she woke up, the man seemed to be taking revenge on her. While she was still trying to avoid him, he directly sucked her soft and white ear. In an instant, Jinwan's nerves were about to explode, and her brain directly crashed. Except for shrinking her neck and instinctively trying to avoid him, her mind was blank and she didn't know what else to do. Her hands also instantly became weak. The man deliberately brushed a warm breath against her ear, and his low husky voice was still against her ear. "Every time I hear you say the words with a serious face, the desire lurking in my heart can't wait to press you down on the spot. I want to hear such a sound from your little mouth that is full of cold words." Jinwan couldn't think calmly. She could only let out a soft moan because of the sensitivity in her ear, but because of the man's words, because of the words that seemed gentle and strong and combined with primitive desire, she firmly shut her mouth and refused to make a sound. "Try calling me COMO again, and?" The man's voice was almost bewitching. His low, sexy, husky voice once again fell behind her sensitive ear, but it was almost threatening. Jinwan bit her lip and didn't speak. She used her strong willpower to resist the man's temptation and instinctively resisted. "I have nothing to do with you. If I don't call you CMO, what else can I call you?" Such soft words with a hint of stubbornness had no effect on the man at all. The burning kiss spread from her white cheek to her neck. He continued to move down without hesitation, until the man suddenly took a hard kiss on her collarbone, causing Jinwan to let out a low cry of pain and excitement. Jinwan suspected that he had left a mark on her collarbone and hurriedly tried to push him away, but she couldn't stop him at all. Just as she froze and didn't dare to wriggle around, the man peeled off most of the clothes he had just put on and kissed her from top to bottom. Jinwan's body shrank uncontrollably again. She felt that if he continued, she would really completely lose control. Looking down, she saw the obvious and clear red mark on her collarbone. Her face was so red that it could almost drip blood. Angrily, she began to push him with all her might. The woman who had been obedient suddenly struggled desperately. Mo Jingshan thought he was hurting her and instinctively loosened his grip. Jinwan rolled to the side, but her whole body rolled off the sofa. Her shoulder and head, which had just been injured, hit the sturdy, hard frame under the coffee table. She gasped in pain. Ignoring her disheveled clothes and disheveled appearance, she curled up on the ground, closed her eyes and covered her head. The pain was so great that tears came out. She rolled down too fast and the force of the collision was definitely not light. Hearing the woman gasping in pain and sitting on the carpet by the sofa with her head shrunk as if she had been greatly wronged, Mo Jingshan immediately reached out and picked her up from below. Jinwan was in pain and anger. The moment she was picked up, she hurriedly tried to push him away, but the man still forcibly picked her up and pressed her against the sofa. He raised his hand to pull down her head and checked her head. "Where did you hit?" Jinwan had never been a person who liked to cry, but at this moment, her eyes were red from the pain. She glared at him and tried to kick him away with her hands and feet. "Don't come over, Mo Jingshan, you gentle scum. You said you would let me recuperate here, but you dared to force yourself on me before I recovered. Sure enough, I was right. You are now a beast in human clothing." Chapter 520. Jean Wan raised her hand to cover her head. And my head. If she didn't show weakness now, this man might really do something to her. It was clear that the arrow was already knocked on the bowstring. The man's gaze was very heavy. Before his desire could dissipate, he was shocked by her pained expression and suppressed everything. When he saw her lowering her head to rub her head, his heart immediately softened. I'm sorry. I've been living like an ascetic for the past few years. It's inevitable that I can't control myself. He raised his hand to rub her head. Is it serious? It's my fault. You stay here and recuperate. I'll try my best to control myself and... Ascetic? She felt that this was Mo Jingshan's self-inflicted injury to gain the confidence of the beast in human clothing. She didn't speak but lowered her head and let him rub it for her. Seeing that the wound on her head hadn't healed, he didn't plan to do anything to her. He helped her put on her messy clothes. The woman refused to let him touch her, but he didn't stop. His gaze fell on the kiss mark on her collarbone and paused for a moment. Then he looked away with a dark gaze and lifted her collar to cover that mark. All right, you sleep in the bedroom. I'll sleep in the study. I won't touch you, the man said softly after helping her put on her clothes. Her clothes were almost stripped off by him, and her pants were almost taken off. Now he said he wouldn't touch her? Jean Wan raised her head, glanced at him, and raised her hand to push her messy hair back. She said with a stern voice, I want to go home. The man looked at her. After a few seconds he said, No. She raised her eyelids and stared at him. It's easier to be raped if I stay here, right? Even if I take a taxi back in the middle of the night, it's not as dangerous as staying here. My wife is in my arms. I can't control myself. I'm sorry. Who's your wife? The man lowered his eyes to look at her. The fire that had not dissipated earlier was still in his eyes. If she hadn't suddenly rolled down and fallen on the coffee table, if she hadn't hurt herself, he would have pulled her back to the sofa and continued. He would never let her off. A man who had been abstinent for more than 3 years was undoubtedly terrifying. Jean Wan's fragile little body could not withstand it. The most dangerous person was by her side. How could she live here peacefully while recuperating? What was the difference between having a tiger that had been starving for 3 years and the tiger seriously saying, Don't worry, I don't eat meat? Although her head was injured, she wasn't so stupid that she couldn't figure out the situation. Seeing that she remained silent with a cold expression and crossed her hands in front of her chest, Mo Jingshan returned to sit by her side. He brushed aside the slightly messy hair on her forehead, his voice heavy. Does it still hurt? Her voice was patient and gentle. Jean Wan raised her hand and rubbed her shoulder. She then touched the spot on her head where she had been hit. She said in a muffled voice, It's much better. It's just a small bump. It was a little heavy when I rolled off the sofa. I'll be fine after a while. The man leaned over and lifted her arm. Let me see. Jean Wan instinctively moved aside. What are you looking at? Her clothes had just been put on, and he unbuttoned them to look at her shoulder? Jean Wan pressed her hands against the clothes on her body and also the fabric on her shoulders. She glanced out the window. It was the end of August and autumn was approaching. It was the rainy season and it was drizzling outside. It was indeed very late. She did not allow him to approach and moved to the side to avoid him. She said seriously and sternly, Mo Jingshan, on account of the fact that you've cared for me for the past 3 years, although I won't go so far as to cut off contact with you and show my gratitude, I'm afraid it's impossible for me to return to being Mrs. Mo. If you stop touching me, I can treat you as my new parent and treat you nicely. But if you ignore my wishes and force yourself on me, don't blame me for turning my back on you. I'll even accept being an ungrateful wretch. Anyway, our relationship has been so bad these years that it can't get any worse. It doesn't matter if the farmer and the snake don't return the favor, don't you think? The man casually replied. You know the farmer and the snake. Not bad. Jean Wan, she glared at him for a while and jumped up from the sofa. Seeing that he didn't intend to continue, she stood by the sofa and kept a certain distance from him. She raised her hand and touched her collarbone through her clothes. Thinking of the hickey, she really couldn't put on a good face. Jean Wan turned to walk to the bedroom and looked out of the window at the rainy night, saying, Don't forget what you said just now. I'll sleep in the bedroom and you'll sleep in the study. The man didn't respond. His good-looking brows furrowed because of her blatant attempt to distance herself from him. Jean Wan didn't look at him. When she reached the bedroom door, she paused and looked down at the gray men's shoes at her feet. She rolled her eyes, licked her right cheek with the tip of her tongue, and suddenly turned her head to say, I'm hungry. Mo Jingshan sat on the sofa and didn't move. There are ingredients in the kitchen. If you're hungry, you can make it yourself. Jinwan instantly turned around. Aren't I a patient? Why should I make it myself? Didn't you let me recuperate here so that you can take care of me yourself? Mo Jingshan was indifferent. I won't cook for an ingrate. Take care of it himself? How could he take care of it himself when she kept such a distance from him? Jinwan, she stared at the man's back for a long time, turned back to the bedroom and slammed the door with a bang. After returning to the room, Jinwan turned on the light and looked at her reflection in the window. Although her clothes were put on, they were still a bit messy. Fortunately, Auntie Chen had bought more than one set of clothes for her. There was another set of clothes in the bag on the bed. When she left, she could wear this new set of clothes. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to see anyone with the messy marks on her body. When she got up in the morning, it was Mo Jingshan who carried her to eat. At noon, she fell asleep and slept until the afternoon. Now she was hungry. After closing the door, there was a faint sound in her stomach. Jinwan pursed her lips and raised her hand to cover her stomach. After thinking for a while, she went straight to the bathroom in the bedroom. After entering, she unbuttoned her clothes in front of the wide floor-to-ceiling mirror. Sure enough, she saw the kiss mark on her collarbone, which was ambiguous and obvious. Chapter 521. How could there be scars behind her ears? Jinwan was so angry that she rolled her eyes at the mirror. It seemed that in this hot weather she couldn't wear clothes with low necklines and suspenders, and she couldn't even tie up her hair. She could only let it down. She slept all day and couldn't fall asleep now. Not long after, Jinwan smelled a fragrance. She thought it was the smell of a neighbor cooking at this time, but the more she smelled it, the more she felt that the smell seemed to come from the bedroom door. She had just straightened the clothes on her body, smelled the smell and couldn't help walking over to open the door. The moment she opened the door, she saw that Mo Jingshan had brought out a plate of assorted fried rice and put it on the table. It was so late and there were not many ingredients. It was still raining outside, so it was not convenient to buy them. Jinwan thought she would have to starve tonight. However, when she saw the simple but well-prepared bowl of fried rice, she was slightly startled, but still kept a straight face. Who did you make this fried rice for? You know the answer. If you don't eat, I'll throw it out, the man said flatly, but he had already put a pair of chopsticks on the table. What a joke. She was hungry. How could she throw it out? Jinwan hurriedly stepped on the pair of men's gray slippers that were too big for her, came to the table, picked up the chopsticks and took a bite. Delicious. Anyway, she was hungry. Everything she ate was delicious. But she forgot how long it had been since she had eaten Boss Mo's cooking. This bite seemed to turn all her unbalanced psychology around. She continued to take a bite, not looking at the man's eyes, but lowered her head to eat without saying a word. Seeing her eating seriously, the man seemed to smile a little, but it was too faint, as if there was no smile at all. Even now, he still felt that Jinwan's words, "create new parents," were very harsh on his ears. Mo Jingshan went to the kitchen and heated a glass of milk for her. She ate most of it and happened to be a little choked. She took the milk and drank it without saying thank you. The temperature was just right and it was not hot. She drank most of it. After eating and drinking, Jinwan was no longer like before, taking the initiative to find something to do after eating the food he cooked, such as putting the dishes and chopsticks in the dishwasher. Now she got up after eating and didn't intend to put the dishes away. The role of the ingrate was vividly portrayed. Mo Jingshan did not say anything, helping her bring the dishes back to the kitchen. Jinwan wanted to go back to the bedroom, but she had eaten too much and drank a glass of milk, and now her stomach was full. Anyway, Mo Jingshan seemed to have calmed down. In this case, there was no need to deliberately avoid him. She walked around the sofa twice and suddenly glanced at the unopened room near the study. Her eyes stopped on the door and she hesitated for a few seconds. When Mo Jingshan came out, he saw that Jinwan had been staring at the door. Seeing him come out, Jinwan pointed to the door. Has this door never been opened? A room that looks like a warehouse with all kinds of books and sundries. Are you curious? The man glanced at the door. Just a pile of sundries? Hai City is the city with the best feng shui in the country. It is surrounded by mountains and rivers. The builder of Aolan International chose this location because a famous feng shui master said that this was the best feng shui in the country, and this room is the center of the feng shui, so it needs a building to support it. But it is not suitable to sleep here, so the other rooms and bedrooms are used normally, but this room is empty, especially this floor, which is located on the top floor of Aolan International. In feng shui, it is sitting on the dragon vein. The origin of Aolan International was actually so particular? Before she spoke, Mo Jingshan's voice said indifferently, Aolan International was bought by grandfather a long time ago. After buying it, he insisted that I should keep it as my wedding house, but I didn't agree. Before you moved in, I only lived here a few times because it was close to the company. There are only some books and sundries in this room, and there is no bed or table. I rarely use it. Jin Wan, from the luxurious decorations in the Yew Garden, I can tell it's all grandfather Mo's work. It seems that he used to be very fond of helping you study your wedding room. He rushed to buy the top floor of Aolan International for a good omen. Indeed, only grandfather Mo would do such a thing. The man's expression did not change. He just turned around. Are you full? Jin Wan nodded and was about to return to the bedroom. She thought for a moment. After all, he had cooked for her, so she hesitated and asked, the food just now was delicious. I think I should be grateful to you. Apart from being Mrs. Mo again, is there anything else I can do for you? How can I compensate you? The man smiled. If you pay with your body, I can consider accepting it. Jin Wan. She turned away, but she really couldn't sleep. She went back to the bedroom, but she didn't want to take off her clothes and take a shower. She felt that even if she closed the bedroom door and the bathroom door, it was still not safe to take a shower here. When there was no sound outside, it was already past 10 o'clock at night. Even though the room was air-conditioned, she would still feel uncomfortable if she didn't shower on a summer night. She sat on the bed and pricked up her ears to listen for a while. After confirming that Mo Jingshan was either busy in the study or asleep and had not come out for a long time, she turned to enter the bathroom. Other than the wound on her head, which needed to be covered with a waterproof shower cap, everything else was unaffected. She had deliberately scratched the back of her hand in the car, and it was only a minor scratch. Although it hurt, it was not a big problem for her to take a shower. Finally, she took a shower, dried her hair and put on her clothes. Jin Wan casually turned up the temperature of the air conditioning in the room, lifted the quilt and was about to lie down. Suddenly the bedroom door opened. She paused and turned to see Mo Jingshan opening the door and coming in. She immediately grabbed the quilt, her face guarded. Aren't you sleeping in the study? Why did you suddenly come to the bedroom so late? The man looked at her, his tone indifferent, and he entered the door as if it were a matter of course. The air conditioning in the study is broken. The author's words. At present there were two sides in the comments section. Side female lead fight. Get up. Fight to death. Torture to death. No matter what she had suffered for so long, the pain of the miscarriage, the violent divorce and the unprepared abuse, no matter the reason, she can't be so easily forgiven. She won't be happy if she doesn't do it. Side. The male lead has been silently sacrificing. Except for being too calm and ruthless to achieve his goal, he has never done anything wrong to the female lead. He has always been considerate of the female lead. In both lives he only wants her. Even after the female lead knows the truth, she still gives him a cold shoulder. How unreasonable. Author, you guys continue to quarrel. I'm very stubborn and won't be affected by either side. I cling to the outline and charge forward, trying to survive in the cracks. Chapter 522. Seeing the man coming over, Jin Wan held the quilt tightly in her arms, moved back and approached the edge of the bed inside. If you can't sleep in the study, isn't there a sofa in the living room? The man came to the bedside and said indifferently to Jin Wan, who had a guarded expression. I've slept on the sofa in the living room for 2 days. The leather sofa is not breathable and uncomfortable. Jin Wan, she pursed her lips and still held the quilt tightly. Then what are you doing? Mo Jingshan, I'm warning you, I'm still a patient. She felt that the divorce could no longer save his abstinence. Maybe she could only show weakness to show that she couldn't bear the torture now. Before she could finish her sentence, the man's arm had already reached over. She was so frightened that she was about to retreat, but she saw the man pick up one of the 2 pillows on the bed, then casually find a set of blankets from the cabinet and directly spread it on the floor. Jin Wan, was he going to sleep on the floor? Without saying a word, the man spread the quilt on the floor, threw the pillow on it, and glanced at Jin Wan, who was sitting upright on the bed with the quilt in her arms and staring at him. What are you looking at? Do you have a problem with me sleeping here? Did he want the global CEO of Shine Group to sleep on the floor? Jin Wan thought about it, put down the quilt and said in a very insincere tone, How can I do that, Xiaomo? Why don't I sleep on the floor? After all, he had given her a new lease on life, hadn't he? No matter how vengeful she was, she had to look good on the surface, Jin Wan thought to herself. The man glanced at her darkly because she called him Xiaomo, and Jinwan subconsciously grabbed the quilt again. Mo Jingshan's voice was cooler than the air conditioner in the bedroom. It's more realistic for you to invite me to sleep with you. Aren't you a patient? Why are you so talkative? Why don't you sleep? Are you very energetic? Jinwan. She got under the quilt, turned over, and slept with her back to the man under the bed. But even if he slept on the floor, they were in the same room. Jinwan turned over again and looked at the man who was still handsome even though he was lying on the floor. She wanted to say that even if he slept on the floor, he could sleep on the floor of the living room. But when the words came to her mouth, she saw that Mo Jingshan was lying flat on the floor, covered by the air conditioner, and his eyes were closed. She knew that he hadn't fallen asleep yet. After all, he had just laid down. However, when she saw his upright sleeping posture, the words that were on the tip of her tongue turned into soft exhalations in the end. Jinwan was about to turn over again when the man's indifferent voice came from under the bed. You've been watching me. Are you secretly observing how I've changed in the past few years? Ji couldn't help but roll her eyes but did not speak. Mo Jingshan casually lifted a corner of the blanket and patted the spot next to him. Do you want to come over? Jinwan still looked at him silently. The man's indifferent and calm eyes in this dark and quiet bedroom were like ink-colored starlight, affecting her ability to control her emotions. During the day he could do whatever he wanted, but in the middle of the night, he would instinctively think about a lot of things, especially when he couldn't fall asleep. She lifted the quilt and turned over on the bed. When she covered herself with the quilt again, she said flatly, I just heard that COMO hasn't been sleeping well in recent years, so I wanted to see how a person is like when they're suffering from insomnia. After all, I've never been so calm and crazy as to endure everything alone. All these years I've been eating well and sleeping well. I basically don't have to think about any memories. At night, I fall asleep as soon as I hit the bed, completely unlike you. The man's brows moved slightly because of her words. He glanced at the woman on the bed with her back to him. Even though she had turned over and covered herself tightly with the quilt, her thin figure still appeared slender and petite under the quilt. From the start, Mo Jingshan knew that she would not easily lower her head. However, he did not expect that her evaluation of him would be that he was so calm that it could drive one crazy. Jinwan closed her eyes. It was late at night and she soon fell asleep. The man sleeping on the floor also felt sleepy in this place that had kept him awake for 3 consecutive years. A good night's sleep. The next morning when Jinwan woke up, the quilt that Mo Jingshan had put on the bed had been taken away. She sat on the bed in a daze for a while, raised her hand to rub her messy hair, and walked out of the bedroom, only to find that Mo Jingshan was not there. She looked at the time. It was already past 9 o'clock in the morning. She had slept for so long yesterday and she slept for so long this night. The biological clock that she had been used to for years was almost disrupted. This place was so close to his company. He must have returned to the company in the morning. What about her? She was not an idle person. She couldn't stay here all the time. Besides, she didn't even have a phone with her. Jinwan didn't want to waste time here. She even planned to wash up after returning to the company or Yuehu Bay. She went straight to the door and was about to go out. However, as soon as she opened the door, she saw Auntie Chen, who was raising her hand to press the door password. The moment the door opened, Auntie Chen's hand froze in the air and her eyes met Jinwan's. Auntie Chen. Jinwan reacted very quickly. Her sleepy face instantly turned into a pleasant smile. Mrs. Mo. Auntie Chen was so excited that she even forgot to change the way she addressed Jinwan. You're awake. Every time I came here these 2 days you were sleeping. I didn't want to disturb you, so Mr. Mo asked me to come over in the morning to make breakfast for you. How are you now? Does your head still hurt? Jinwan's eyes paused on the vegetables and fruits in Auntie Chen's hands. Before she spoke, Auntie Chen pushed her back into the door with a smile. Still very excited, she took her hand and said, I heard that you have been in England for the past few years. I thought I would never see you again. I didn't expect to see you again. It's so good to see you again. Auntie Chen, you don't have to make breakfast for me. I can go back to the company to eat. It's late now. I'm going to the company. Jinwan's feelings for Auntie Chen were almost close to family, and the warmth in her heart was real. How can I do that? You are injured and Mr. Mo has a meeting to attend. He specially asked me to buy some of your favorite dishes to cook for you. Hurry up, sit down and have a good rest. Auntie Chen pulled Jinwan to sit down on the sofa and then took out some fruits from the shopping bag that Jinwan used to eat. I'll wash some fruits for you. Wait a minute. Jinwan wanted to say that now was a good time for her to slip away while Mo Jingshan was away. In broad daylight, even if she had no money or cell phone, she could still go back to her company. Chapter 523. Mrs. Mo, do you still like Chinese food as much as before? How about I make some lean meat porridge? Auntie Chin brought out the washed and cut fruit. When she saw Jinwan looking at her, she paused and said shyly, I'm used to calling you that, so it's not easy for me to call you Miss G. Jinwan smiled, picked up a piece of fruit, put it in her mouth and took 2 bites. I'll just eat some fruit. You really don't need to make breakfast for me. By the way, Auntie Chin, can you lend me your cell phone? Cell phone? Hearing this, Auntie Chin instinctively took out her cell phone, but when she was about to hand it to Jinwan, she hesitated and suddenly took it back. Seeing the cell phone suddenly being taken away from her fingertips, Jinwan blinked and looked at Auntie Chen innocently. Although I got my card back, my cell phone fell into the sea and is gone now. I can't contact anyone. I want to call the company. Well, my cell phone accidentally fell into the water a few days ago, and it's not working well these days. The signal is not good. Mrs. Mo, if you want to make a call, you'd better wait for Mr. Mo to come back and use his cell phone, Auntie Chin said and put the cell phone back in her pocket with a smile. Jinwan, what on earth did Mo Jingshan say to Auntie Chin? She didn't even lend her his cell phone. She could only blame herself for borrowing his cell phone from him yesterday. She didn't expect that she would only have one chance to borrow his cell phone all day. If she had known this, she would have asked Xiaoba to pick her up yesterday. Now it was too late to regret. Seeing Jinwan lowering her head to eat the fruit gloomily, Auntie Chin smiled and didn't say anything more. She turned into the kitchen to prepare breakfast for her. Lean meat porridge sounded simple, but it was not easy to make. She had to stir-fry the meat, make all kinds of ingredients and cook the porridge. It would take her at least an hour to make it. While Auntie Chen was busy in the kitchen, Jinwan once again reached out to her with an innocent and pitiful look, looking for various reasons to borrow her cell phone. Finally, Jinwan said that she hadn't been back to the company for several days. Mo Jingshan went to the company for a routine morning meeting. He had business to attend to and so did she. She had a lot of things to do in the company and couldn't be delayed. She begged her to lend her phone for a minute. She only needed to call the people in the company to tell them something. Seeing that Jinwan was really anxious, he took a look at the time and remembered that Mo Jingshan said he would be back before 10:30. Thinking that Mr. Mo would be back soon, he handed the phone to Jinwan. Jinwan quickly called Xiaoba and told her where she was, the building number and the elevator password, asking her to come to the rescue as soon as possible. Xiaoba didn't understand why Jinwan went to Aolan International. She only remembered that Jinwan seemed to live in the U Garden and didn't know much about Aolan International. She thought something had happened, so she told her everything in such a hurry and asked her to take the money and cell phone to find her. After hanging up the phone, Xiaoba went straight to Aolan International as requested. 20 minutes later, Xiaoba arrived, stood outside and rang the doorbell. Hearing the sound, Auntie Chin hurried out. She was wondering why Mr. Mo didn't come in directly but rang the doorbell, but Jinwan had already rushed to open the door. As soon as she saw Jinwan in the door, Xiaoba asked in surprise, "Boss, what happened? Yesterday you asked me to help you get a new certificate, and today you asked me to come to rescue you with a cell phone and money. Don't you live in Yuehu Bay? What's wrong with Aolan International?" Before Xiaoba finished her words, Auntie Chin felt that something was wrong. She stuck her head out behind Jinwan and asked, "What's wrong? What's wrong? Who is it?" Jinwan continued to block her way. She took the newly bought cell phone and a dozen notes from Xiaoba, quickly stuffed them into her pocket and said with a smile, "My company's assistant." When Jinwan finally moved aside, Auntie Chin saw a young girl with a pair of round glasses who looked innocent and lovely, and she nodded. "Ah, your assistant? Do you work in the same way as Assistant Shin?" Auntie Chin nodded. "Yes, similar to Shin Mu," Jinwan explained with a smile. Xiaoba didn't know what was going on, but she still nodded to Auntie Chin. "Hello. Good. Have you had breakfast before you came? I just made lean meat porridge. Would you like to come in and have some?" Auntie Chin said and reached out to pull Xiaoba into the door. Before Xiaoba realized what was going on, Jinwan reached out and pulled Auntie Chin's hand back. It could be seen that Auntie Chin didn't know why Xiaoba came here and was afraid that something would go wrong, so she simply asked Xiaoba to stay and wait for Mo Jingshan to come back. She never expected that one day Auntie Chen would take Mo Jingshan's side. She even had to guard against Auntie Chen. "I made a lot of porridge. Your little assistant looks very thin and must eat very little. Come in and have some with us." "It's okay. No, I've eaten. I just came to deliver something to COG." Xiaoba hurriedly hid outside. "What did you deliver?" Auntie Chin immediately set her eyes on Jinwan and Xiaoba's hands. Xiaoba reacted quickly this time. Knowing that she had to help Jinwan cover up the money and cell phone, she suddenly took out her wallet. I came to deliver a wallet to COG. She didn't bring any money with her, so I brought it to her. Oh, I see. Auntie Chen believed her. She looked back at the time. It was almost 10:30. She took Xiaoba's hand and chatted for a while before taking her in for breakfast. After a few minutes of pulling and pulling, the elevator door opened. Footsteps could be heard approaching from behind little Mina. Xiaoba turned her head, looked at the man walking over slowly, and suddenly felt a bolt from the blue in her head. Emo. When Jinwan saw Mo Jingshan, the fire of hope in her heart was instantly extinguished. Why did he come back so quickly? She hadn't even been able to get out of the room. Noticing the man's gaze, Jinwan subconsciously looked away, turned around and stood on the other side of Auntie Chen. Mo Jingshan had come behind Xiaoba. He must have just come back from the company. He was still wearing a black shirt and trousers, and his suit jacket was casually hung on the crook of his arm, looking noble and cold. In his other hand, he was carrying a pink bag, in which a delicate flat, long box could be vaguely seen. In the corner of the box she could vaguely see XXX high-end women's lingerie. Was this the lingerie that Boss Missouri personally bought for their boss Nguyen? Xiaoba's expression froze when she met Mo Jingshan's eyes. So this was CEO Mo's place? Boss had been staying here for the past few days? Chapter 524. Jinwan closed her eyes angrily. Good my ass. Didn't you see that your boss was almost under house arrest because of this reason? At this time she still didn't forget to flatter Mo Jingshan and be infatuated with him. Glancing at Xiaoba's quick action of putting away the wallet, Mo Jingshan smiled indifferently. All right. Xiaoba's eyes widened. Ah. Boss Missouri spoke to her. And smiled at her. He smiled and said good to her. The first time she spoke to Boss Missouri was in the hotel. At that time she accidentally ran into him and Jinwan. When she opened the door she accidentally ran into Xiao Mo taking a bath, but he didn't look so good at that time. Now he was actually smiling. Seeing Xiaoba's eyes almost falling into a state of madness, Jinwan, she realized that it was a big mistake to have an infatuated female assistant by her side. Auntie Chen looked at them. Seeing that Mr. Mo was back, she immediately smiled and turned to continue with her work as if relieved. Jinwan stood in front of the door, stared at Mo Jingshan's smiling face, and gradually became expressionless with anger. She couldn't even go home if she wanted to? Mo Jingshan glanced at her, turned to walk in and said indifferently, Don't you want to come in and have a seat? Jinwan looked at his back and then at Xiaoba. Xiaoba forcibly suppressed the excitement on her face and hurriedly waved her hands sensibly. No, I didn't know COG lived in your place. If I had known this was your place I would never have come. Jinwan, well, I still have something to do in the company. Boss, you should try to win over each other. Get married again as soon as possible. I still have the vice president to take care of the company. Sister Xia has finished her confinement and can come to the company to help at any time. You don't have to worry about anything. Focus on your love. With that, Xiaoba took a deep breath at Mo Jingshan's back with a look of admiration, turned around and hurried to the elevator, not daring to stay any longer. The corner of Jinwan's mouth twitched. What the hell was she dating? It was not until the elevator door closed that Jinwan glared angrily at the man who had walked inside. Mo Jingshan was upright and dignified. Even though the underwear in his hand seemed to be the one he bought for her, he didn't look embarrassed or guilty at all. Jinwan walked over and glanced at the bag he had placed on the sofa. Sure enough, she didn't see wrongly. It was really underwear. Yesterday, Auntie Chen bought 2 sets of clothes for her, but there was only 1 set of underwear. Under normal habits, she would definitely change today. She didn't expect that he would buy these things for her after coming back from the company meeting. Jinwan pursed her lips. Why did you come back so early? Are all meetings so short? He said casually, It's a routine morning meeting. It won't be long. Oh, the meeting didn't last long. How disappointing. He didn't even give her a chance to slip away. Jinwan stared at him for a long while and then slowly took a step back. She tried not to touch the pocket containing her new cell phone and money so as not to attract his attention. She just turned sideways to ask, What happened to the 2 kidnappers that day? 1 dead and 1 injured. It's a gang crime. The other accomplices have been caught. The domestic police are quite efficient in handling this case. No wonder they were so arrogant and so many police officers were dispatched. It turned out that there were more than 2 people. What about your car? Jin Wan had a dark guess that Mo Jingshan had long wanted to change his car. He drove a car worth tens of millions into the sea without even blinking. The man glanced at her and asked indifferently, "What kind of car do you like? Does it have anything to do with what kind of car I like? It's not my car that fell into the sea. I don't need to change my car." Jin Wan snorted coldly. The man glanced down at the parking lot from the window. Jin Wan's car was parked below. He smiled faintly. "Why did your assistant come here just now?" Jin Wan stood behind him and said discontentedly, "A certain CEO of Shine Group didn't even give me 100 yuan. I had to find someone to give me the money. But you came back before the wallet fell into my hands." Xiao Ba, that coward, left as he pleased. He came here as if he didn't come at all. There was no difference. He glanced at her. Jin Wan avoided his gaze and turned back to the bedroom on the pretext of going to the bathroom. She took the money and cell phone out of her pocket. Worried that Mo Jingshan would come in and see them, she quietly took these things and the SIM card Andy Chen had helped her into the bathroom. She sat on the toilet and quietly put the SIM card into the cell phone. After turning on the cell phone and making sure the cell phone was working, she smugly switched the cell phone to silent mode, went out and hid the cell phone. She would take it out when she needed it. It was not until Andy Chen said that the porridge was ready and asked her to come out to eat that Jin Wan went out. When Andy Chen put the porridge on the table for her, Mo Jingshan walked past the dining table, took a look at Jin Wan, who was calm and composed when she came out of the bedroom this time as if she had a backer, and turned his slender and straight figure to the study. Jin Wan ate the porridge, looked up at his back, and her heart was slightly anxious. He wouldn't find out, would he? After entering the study, the man casually turned on the computer under the bookshelf, and the surveillance software in front of the door quickly projected the scene of the past half an hour, including the scene where Xiao Ba stuffed a stack of money and cell phone into Jin Wan's hand and Jin Wan hid them in her pocket. The man's elegant and deep brows moved slightly. He smiled, turned off the screen and turned to go out. Jin Wan was still sitting at the dining table eating porridge. The cut on her neck caused by Mo Pylan's ring at the Mo family had faded a lot, and the cut on the back of her hand only hurt a little when it came into contact with water. However, when she took a bath yesterday, the wound on the back of her hand that had almost healed began to redden again. She ate indifferently, but the redness on the back of her hand was very obvious. Seeing that she was completely indifferent to her wound, Mo Jingshan watched for a long time before saying lightly, "After eating, I'll apply some medicine on your hand. Don't touch water for a day." Jin Wan looked down at it. It was a cut she deliberately made in the car. She pursed her lips. "No, it's just a little cut. It'll heal by itself." Mo Jingshan took her hand. When Jin Wan was about to withdraw her hand, he held it and looked at the thin cut under the skin, which was still faintly oozing blood. Because she had taken a bath, it was obviously inflamed, so it was red. Jin Wan furrowed her brows and was about to withdraw her hand when she raised her head to see that the man said firmly, "You have to apply medicine." Meeting the man's gaze, Jin Wan quickly looked away, but she could not withdraw her hand no matter how hard she tried. Chapter 525. Jin Wan wanted to withdraw her hand but couldn't. She had no choice but to nod, and Mo Jingshan let go of her hand. After dinner, the man really insisted on applying the medicine for her. He forced her to sit on the sofa and raised the back of her hand to face him. When he helped her apply the medicine, his movements were very gentle as if he was afraid of hurting her, but it was impossible for the medicine to not hurt her skin. Jin Wan endured it and did not make a sound. She just pursed her lips and looked at the man whose movements were unbelievably gentle. Knowing that she was uncomfortable, Mo Jingshan did not expose her, but his movements were extremely patient. Andy Chen came out of the kitchen. Seeing this scene, she immediately smiled and quietly returned to the kitchen so as not to disturb them. "I can do it myself." After applying the medicine on her right hand, Jin Wan reached out to take the medicine in his hand. The man held her down. "Don't move." Jin Wan looked at him and did not speak, but frowned impatiently. When the man finally let go of her hand, she immediately stepped back to keep a distance from him. Mo Jingshan unhurriedly put the medicine aside and looked at the woman who was still a meter away from him on the short sofa. His handsome brows moved slightly. "Don't be in a hurry to make your stand clear. I know how you feel. I'll give you time." It could be seen that Jin Wan had let go of what happened 3 years ago, especially when the truth was right in front of her. She had to let go of it. But the ravine he had cut with his own hands was still there. In the past 3 years she had grown up alone, and there were too many indestructible things in her character. She needed time. Jin Wan took a look at him, did not speak, got up and left. She habitually closed the bedroom door and did not look back. Mo Jingshan got up, walked to the balcony of the living room, picked up his cell phone and dialed a number. His dark and deep eyes overlooked the view of High City in the distance. The moment the call was connected, he said indifferently, 3 years ago when I was in a coma because of the car accident, Jinwan was always in the hospital? On the other side of the phone, Qin Siding was silent for a moment because of his sudden question. He said, except for being forcibly taken home by your mother, Ms. Wanzhou, for several days, she was almost always in the hospital. What does she do in the hospital every day? Of course she was waiting for you. At that time she had just had a miscarriage and her physical and psychological condition was very poor, but she did not shed a single tear. She was so calm that it was scary. She just stood outside your ward every day. The doctor did not allow her to enter, so she stood outside the door like a fool. She did not make any noise, and when she was tired she would sit on the chair outside the door for a while. When she saw a doctor coming out of the ward, she would stand up and ask you when you would wake up. Day after day, because they were not sure if you would wake up, even your father and mother had to return to their normal lives. They could no longer stay in the hospital every day, but she just stood outside alone, separated by a door. She could not enter, but she refused to leave. Qin Siding sighed as if feeling sorry for Jinwan. You know Jinwan better than anyone else. Before you divorced, you refused any of our advice because you were afraid that you wouldn't be able to make up your mind after hearing this, right? Mo Jingshan's gaze was fixed in a certain direction outside the window. For a long time he did not speak. Qin Siding, what? Jinwan is living a wonderful life now. She doesn't need to rely on you at all. Your woman is completely out of your control. Doesn't it feel good? Mo Jingshan, you're asking me all this now? Do you want to empathize with the pain she went through back then? You were in a coma at that time, and such a great pain forced her to hide all the regrets and sadness of the abortion in her heart, because nothing was more terrible than the news that you would never wake up. No matter what reason you had, the first thing you did when you opened your eyes was to divorce her. You didn't even give her a buffer time. I can't imagine how much she loved you. She even tried to persuade you to stay when you were cold to her. At that time, she would talk to everyone with a smile every day as if you were the greatest motivation for her as long as you were alive, and no difficulties could defeat her. But in the end she still collapsed and you were the executioner, weren't you? Seeing Mo Jingshan still didn't speak, Qin Siding sneered again. Last time her friend came to the hospital to give birth, we chatted for a while, but she didn't mention a word about you. She wasn't even interested in you at all. In my opinion, it's hard for you to have any contact with her. It's hard for you to even meet her, isn't it? After a moment of silence, Mo Jingshan glanced at the door not far away and said lightly, well, it's hard. Qin Siding, what? Are you unhappy? Do you want me to go over and have a few drinks with you? Tell me your coordinates and I'll cry with you for a while. Mo Jingshan was expressionless. Aolan International. Qin Siding sneered. You've been living in that place for 3 years. Your wife, who you lost, should be either in the MN group or talking and laughing with others at a business dinner table. Look at you now, you're like a stone waiting for your wife. Who are you pretending to be? Mo Jingshan didn't care about Qin Siding's sarcasm. He hung up the phone and turned his eyes to the closed door of the bedroom. Jinwan had been sleeping a lot these days. It was still noon. She couldn't fall asleep, but she just stayed in the bedroom. He threw his cell phone on the sofa, walked over without any pause and turned the doorknob without any hesitation. This was his place. Jinwan knew that it was useless even if she locked the door from the inside, so she didn't bother to do this. Without locking the door opened smoothly. The curtains in the bedroom were closed, and the moment the door opened, light from the living room fell in. Jinwan, who was sitting on the carpet by the bed in a daze, was startled. She raised her eyes and stared blankly at the man coming toward her. What are you doing? She asked subconsciously. Without a word, Mo Jingshan pulled her up from the carpet and put her on the bed. Mo Jingshan. Jinwan frowned unhappily because he came to hug her again, but the man didn't speak. Jinwan was angry. Mo Jingshan. I'm giving you time, but it doesn't mean I'm allowing you to sit on the floor and blow on the air conditioner that's only 20 degrees. You haven't recovered yet and you want to catch a cold again? Jinwan didn't notice the temperature of the air conditioner. She just felt hot sitting here, so she picked up the air conditioner remote control and pressed it casually. She didn't expect that the temperature would be so low. Chapter 526. Mo Jingshan placed her on the bed and covered her with the quilt. Without a word, he picked up the remote control and adjusted the temperature of the air conditioner to 26 degrees. Then he looked at the woman sitting on the bed. Her fair face was mostly filled with habitual forbearance, and there were no traces of her usual coquettishness in front of him. In the past 3 years she had grown up as he had hoped. If Jean Wan used to be a hedgehog who was spoiled by his side and was about to have all her thorns pulled out, right now she was a harmless and lazy cat. She looked calm but had incomparably sharp claws. Qin's sighting will come over today. Let him check your head injury. If you don't want to go out, have a good rest in the bedroom. The man sat on the edge of the bed and held her hand. As though inadvertently holding her hand, he placed it on her lower abdomen. This action caused Jean Wan to shiver. She wanted to withdraw her hand but could not. She looked at him and was about to speak when she remembered he had mentioned Qin's sighting earlier and couldn't help asking, "Has Dr. Qin been in High City these years? Is he married to Miss Shi?" The man's hand was still intertwined with hers. No. Jean Wan clearly remembered that Xiao Lui had failed to snatch Shi Niange away from her. He looked as if he had been seriously injured when he mentioned Shi Niange. Why hadn't Shi Niange and Qin's sighting come to an agreement after so many years? What? Based on Dr. Qin's feelings for Miss Shi, even if he doesn't say it, anyone can see how devoted he is to her. Why hasn't he married Miss Shi yet? Just as she was about to withdraw her hand without batting an eyelid, Mo Jingshan released her fingers one by one. When she shrank back into the bed to guard against him, he curved his lips and raised his brows. You already know that he's very loyal to his lover? It seems like you've been in contact with each other these years? It sounded like the man was somewhat displeased. Although it was not obvious, Jean Wan could feel it. She retracted her hand, which had just regained its freedom, and placed it under the quilt to avoid the man's touch. She curled her lips and said, "Dr. Qin has always taken good care of me since we were in High City. Later he also took good care of me in Los Angeles. Aren't you good brothers? This so-called brother doesn't want this woman. Since he's not married, it's not too much to help take care of her, right?" The air around the man sitting on the edge of the bed instantly became colder than the air conditioner. He stared at her and seemed to be smiling, but his smile wasn't very happy. "You still have such thoughts about him?" Jean Wan looked at him. Even though this man was looking at her without saying a word, his gaze was enough to make one feel as though they were sitting on pins and needles. Even though he was silent, he was still filled with an oppressive aura. She smiled again. For people like Dr. Qin, people who aren't familiar with him will only feel that he's too cold and unapproachable, but after getting to know him, they find that he has the qualities of a warm man. Besides, the profession of a doctor also adds a sacred halo to him, making people instinctively want to get close to him. He has always taken such good care of me. Even though the two of us rarely contact each other, I was the one who took the initiative to call him after returning to China. Speaking of which, he's also an old friend whom I haven't blocked all of my contact numbers. Mo Jingshan was expressionless. You're so interested in him? Jean Wan casually folded her hands under the quilt and casually played with her nails. She said slowly and casually, originally, I thought that since he has been entangled with Shi Niange for so many years, I didn't have too many thoughts about him. But today you said that he's still unmarried. Maybe I can take the opportunity to throw an olive branch of love at Dr. Qin. Maybe there's really a chance between us? Mo Jingshan's voice dangerously dragged out. There's no chance between the two of you. Why not? Isn't it easy for a woman to pursue a man? Based on my methods, it's not that easy to pursue a man. No chance? If I haven't tried, how do you know there's no chance? Jean Wan continued to smile. The man by the bedside stared at her with an indifferent expression. His gaze was unkind. However, Jean Wan appeared as though she did not see it. Her eyes shone with interest. Didn't you say that Dr. Qin would come today? In a while, I'll let you see if there's a chance between the two of us. Mo Jingshan unhurriedly raised his handsome brows, calmly watching her. Did I give you too much time to calm down, causing you to think about all these messy things? Jean Wan also raised her brows. Her gaze seemed to carry a smile, but it was like a hidden cat's claws that revealed a sharp tip. Weren't you the one who talked about Dr. Qin first? Mo Jingshan. If you mention his name again, I'll make you cry on this bed until you can't stop. You can try. After taking the opportunity to chase Mo Jingshan out of the bedroom, Jean Wan laid on the bed and quietly picked up her phone. She had just placed the SIM card in and hurriedly hid it. Now that she took it out, she saw the message that Mr. Vince had sent her yesterday. In the past 2 years, although some of the popular trends in the country had gradually converged with those of 7 years later, such as Weibo and WeChat, there were still very few people who used them. At the very least, it would take another year or two for them to become popular. Thus, even though Jin Wan immediately used WeChat, the number of people in her friend list was pitifully small. There were only a few people in the company. Most of her communication with others still relied on text messages. Mr. Vince's message said that he had already returned to High City. However, this message was not as warm as it used to be. In the past, no matter where he went, after saying his location, he would then ask where she was or what she was doing. However, this time he only said that he had returned to High City, and then there was a full stop. Jin Wan glanced at it and did not know what to reply. She also felt that Mr. Vince's attitude recently seemed a little strange. A person who had been rejected by her for 3 years, but whose enthusiasm did not diminish, suddenly began to deliberately distance himself from her overnight. Although he maintained a calm way of interacting with her, he was careful not to be as warm as before. She didn't feel disappointed just because a person who had always been warm to her suddenly turned cold. In the past few years, because he had helped her, she didn't want to hurt him too much. In fact, this was the most appropriate way for her to get along with him. Chapter 527. Hearing Andy Chin calling her from outside, Jin Wan got up and went out. I'm going back to High City University to cook for my little son in the afternoon. I'll come back tomorrow. Take good care of yourself. Mr. Mo said that you can't wander around right now, so be good and don't be in a hurry to leave. I'll come back tomorrow to cook for you. Auntie Chin took Jin Wan's hand and said, What do you want to eat? Call me when you've decided. I'll come back tomorrow after buying the ingredients. Jin Wan nodded. I'm fine with anything. It's not that troublesome. You don't have to work so hard. Taking care of yourself is the most important thing. Auntie Chin smiled and chatted with her for a while before leaving. Jin Wan went to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. She was about to return to the bedroom when she suddenly heard a knock on the door. She paused. Did Auntie Chin leave something here? Jin Wan quickly walked to the door, holding the glass of water in one hand and opening the door with the other. However, the moment she opened the door, she was stunned to see that the person who came in was Chin Siding, who had taken off his white coat and was wearing a white shirt and black trousers. The moment Chin Siding saw Jin Wan, he thought he had seen wrongly and took a step back. He raised his eyes to look at the door number and then shifted his gaze to Jin Wan's face. Chin Siding? Why was Jin Wan here? This is F*King Aolan International. At this moment, the door of the study opened and Mo Jingshin came in. Before Jin Wan could say a word to Chin Siding, he reached out to take the 2 bottles of good wine from Chin Siding's hands and then slammed the door with a pen. Jin Wan stood by the door. What's going on? Wasn't that Dr. Chin? Mo Jingshin's expression was cold. You saw wrongly. He's just a wine delivery man. Chin Siding stood by the door. But didn't you say Dr. Chin would come today? That man was clearly him. No, is Chin Siding that ugly? Jin Wan, Chin Siding, who was still standing outside the door but had heard their conversation through the door. Jin Wan glanced at the 2 bottles of wine in Mo Jingshin's hands and paused. She subconsciously turned back to look at the wall in the living room. 3 years ago, she had bumped into the wine cabinet, and all the precious wine inside had fallen out. She had drunk quite a lot of it. In the following years, Mo Jingshin didn't put any bottle of wine in his apartment at Aolan International. He even removed the wine cabinet and replaced it with a shelf for documents. Mo Jingshin's phone rang almost at the same time. He did not need to guess to know it was Chin Siding, whose expression was as black as the bottom of a pot. He glanced at his phone and switched it to silent mode. Jin Wan was still absent-mindedly staring at the wine cabinet that had turned into a table shelf. She turned to see the man with a strong aura throw his cell phone on the sofa and meet her eyes. It could be seen that he really did not intend to let Chin Siding in. It's rare for Dr. Chin to come here on vacation. He must have something to talk to you about, right? Jin Wan harbored a deep sense of guilt toward Chin Siding. She felt that she should do something. Otherwise, it would be too unfair to just lock him outside like this. He glanced at her and unhurriedly placed the wine aside. When he glanced at the year written on the 2 bottles of wine, he took the time to casually reply, What did I say earlier? You dare to mention a single word about him? Jin Wan glared at him. She felt that facing a man who had not touched meat for 3 years, anything he said would definitely have a certain degree of threat. How infuriating. Seeing that there was no longer any movement outside, Jin Wan rushed into the bedroom. She had just taken out her phone from under the pillow when she saw a message from Chin Siding. Chin Siding? ? Jin Wan's lips twitched. She rushed to reply, I'm sorry to call you Dr. Qin. Today's incident was purely an accident. Qin sighting? How could Jinwan dare to tell him the words she had casually said to Mo Jingshan? Faced with his speechless expression, she could only send a few question marks. She wanted to cry but had no tears as she replied to him. There was a misunderstanding earlier. Several minutes later, Qin sighting had probably already gone downstairs. He sent another message. Why are you at Aolan International? Jinwan's mind was filled with guilt for accidentally hurting Qin sighting. She did not carefully look at his message with question marks and continued to reply, I'm sorry, Dr. Qin T. After I leave this place, I'll definitely apologize to you properly. Qin sighting, these two lunatics. This old man had specially brought 2 bottles of good wine to watch Mo Jingshan cry. In the end, the moment he arrived, he saw Jinwan running to open the door. Was this not enough? She even said he was ugly? Damn it. After staying at Aolan International for another night, Jinwan originally wanted to find an opportunity to enter the study to check if the air conditioner was really broken. If it was really broken, why did Mo Jingshan not call anyone to fix it? In the end, she could not find an opportunity. At night, Mo Jingshan once again entered the bedroom to sleep on the floor. Looking at the man lying on the floor, Jinwan quietly hid the phone hidden under the pillow deeper. Thankfully, she had turned it off an hour ago. The man's eyes were closed. Even though he was sleeping on the floor, his posture was dignified and elegant, as though he was sleeping on a limited edition mattress. He did not speak up because of her stealthily reaching her hand under the pillow. However, when Jinwan carefully rolled over with the quilt wrapped around her, the man's lips silently curved in an indulgent smile. The next morning, Mo Jingshan did not have a morning meeting. Auntie Chin came over early to cook. As they were eating, someone knocked on the door. The knock at this time was very sudden. No one else would come to Aolan International. Jinwan also felt it was strange. She turned to see that Auntie Chen had already gone to open the door, so she continued to sit by the dining table without moving. However, after opening the door, she vaguely heard Auntie Chen's voice. Oh, okay, please wait a moment. Auntie Chen turned and quickly walked over to say, Mr. Mo, there are 2 police officers. They seem to be special police. They say they have something to discuss with you. Hearing the word, special police, before Mo Jingshan could speak, Jinwan had already stood up and walked over. When she arrived at the door, she saw Yen Gu and another person dressed in a police uniform standing outside. She immediately asked in surprise, Yen Gu? How did you find your way here? Yen Gu was clearly surprised that Jinwan would be here. He paused for a moment before saying, Sister Nguyen? Previously, after you were kidnapped by the kidnappers, the police were unable to contact you. We found this place through some channels and wanted to come here to give a statement, but why did you? Before Yen Gu could finish speaking, Mo Jingshan's tall and cold figure had already walked out. The moment he saw Mo Jingshan, he realized that Jinwan seemed to have been staying here for the past 2 days. Yen Ji's eyes instantly widened. What exactly is his relationship with you, Sister Nguyen? Mo Jingshan stood by the door, expressionless. The woman in front of you is my ex-wife. Chapter 528. Jinwan immediately turned back to glare harshly at Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan's unperturbed gaze swept over her as though saying, What's the problem? Jinwan, ex-wife? Yen Gu was so shocked that even the short hair on his head stood straight up. He stared in disbelief at the man behind Jinwan. Ah? So, the last time they sat together to eat beef noodles they already knew each other. Furthermore, they were in such a relationship as ex-wife and ex-husband. It was no wonder that even though they knew each other, they pretended not to know each other. It seemed like the 2 of them did not get along well after their divorce. Since that was the case, after 2 days of investigation, they learned that this man was Mr. Mo. That was why the housekeeper at the Mo family previously addressed her as Mrs. Mo. Yen Gu felt as though a huge case had finally been solved. He scanned Mo Jingshan up and down several times. Mo Jingshan calmly and coldly glanced at him. Should a police officer who comes to take a statement have this kind of gaze and attitude? Hearing this, Yen Gu immediately put on a stern expression. He glanced at him awkwardly and then turned to Jinwan, who was standing speechlessly by the door. Sister Nguyen, is it convenient now? Can we go in? Jinwan was about to speak when Mo Jingshan's cold voice rang. It's not convenient. Jinwan, Yen Gu, the other police officer who came with Yen Gu. Jinwan smiled and moved away from the door. She then turned to look at Mo Jingshan. Seeing that the man did not move and had no intention of letting them in, she turned to speak to Yen Gu. From the perspective of a citizen and the police, we have to cooperate no matter if it's convenient or not. But why are you here to take a statement? Aren't you a SWAT trainee? Our boss Ling sent me here. This is the brother in charge of taking the statement. Someone discovered your car parked here during an investigation, so I came to take a look. Yen Gu smiled at Jin Wan, revealing a set of white teeth. After all, I'm still your bodyguard. I have to pay more attention to your matters. Jin Wan tilted her head slightly and used her chin to point inside. Come in. Thank you for your hard work. Yen Gu hurriedly signaled the police officer by the side with his eyes. The two of them were about to enter, but before they could step through the door, they raised their eyes to see the man still standing by the door with no intention of giving up his seat. The moment he met Mo Jingshan's cold and unwelcoming gaze, Yen Ji's expression became more cautious. He turned to Jin Wan. Sister Nguyen, since you're an ex-wife and ex-husband, have you been living together for the past 2 days? Jin Wan calmly replied, Didn't I injure my head that day? You saw it for yourself. After that, I fell into a deep sleep for 2 days. When I woke up, I was already here. It's probably more convenient to take care of me here. Right now, Yen Gu was acting like a bodyguard again. Anyone who harbored ill intentions toward Jin Wan would be his #1 target. However, seeing that Mr. Mo didn't have the slightest self-awareness of being investigated by the police and didn't have any intention of letting them in, Yen Ji's expression immediately turned stiff. In that case, after the statement is taken, Sister Nguyen, I'll send you home. It's not appropriate for you to stay here. Jin Wan nodded. All right. Jin Wan readily agreed. She readily agreed, but Mo Jingshan raised his gaze to sweep a glance at her. All right? Jin Wan also glared at him. Anyway, there were 2 police officers by her side. Her reason to leave was also smooth. Why wasn't it good? This was simply too good. However, the man casually closed the door. Yen Gu, who was about to collapse into the door, was instantly slapped out. Yen Gu, whose nose was almost broken, stood outside the door. He then looked at the police officer by the side, who was equally dumbfounded. The 2 of us, have we been chased out? The police officer. I'm not sure. I've just been promoted from an intern. This is my first time out. Speaking of which, is it so difficult to take a statement? Yen Gu. Inside the door, Jin Wan's expression was fierce as she watched Mo Jingshan, who had once again shut them out. She angrily said, Mo Jingshan, are you crazy? Keeping the police outside? Aren't you afraid of being arrested and interrogated for a few days? Let me tell you, being disrespectful to the police and refusing to cooperate with them is enough for them to arrest you. The man coldly and indifferently said, Even if you lend them 100 guts, they wouldn't dare. Jin Wan ignored him and reached out to open the door. The man casually placed his hand on the door, not giving her the chance to open it. While she was arguing, he lowered his head to look at the little woman who was struggling to tug his hand away to open the door. His voice was cold and clear as he said, You've only lived here for a few days, but there have been quite a few people who have come to rescue you. I won't bicker with the assistant called Xiao Ba, but the brat outside isn't suitable to be your bodyguard. When you return, fire him. In the future, stay away from him. Why do you care who I hire to be my bodyguard? If it wasn't to ensure my own safety, why would I need a bodyguard by my side? Besides, the reason I hired him is because I almost got into danger last night. That's why Do you think I don't know that you were assaulted by a drunkard at night? Or do you think I don't know that you brought that Mr. Vince upstairs into your house? The man's tone was indifferent to the point where there was almost no warmth. However, it was clear that when he mentioned Yen Gu and Mr. Vince, who she had barely contacted recently, his eyes were clearly filled with displeasure. Jin Wan's gaze faltered. She abruptly glared at him. You sent people to follow me? The man lowered his eyes to look at her. If secretly arranging 2 bodyguards by your side counts as following you, you can think of it that way. Jin Wan was momentarily speechless. Did he arrange for people to protect her without her knowing? She had been so busy after returning to the country that she did not pay much attention to such matters. That incident with the drunkard was also because Mr. Vince was nearby and had rushed over quickly. As a result, she did not know that there was actually someone secretly taking care of her safety. Later on, she moved away in time, so she did not pay much attention to such matters. She pursed her lips and pointed to the door in front of her. No matter what, you can't just lock Yen Gu and the others outside like this. In any case, they are police officers and have a mission. If you don't finish this statement today, there will be other police officers coming tomorrow. Sooner or later, you have to cooperate. His eyes seemed to be smiling but they were cold. It was obvious that he was very repulsed and bothered by Yengu. Or perhaps he was very bothered by all the men who got close to her. You can cooperate, but after opening the door, you have to try asking him to take you away. Chapter 529. Jinwan glanced at him. Mo Jingshan, it's my freedom to stay or leave. I have no money, no cell phone, and no freedom here. Aside from eating, I only sleep. Even a pig can occasionally see the outside world. Why should I be restricted to this extent just because I'm recovering? You don't have money? No cell phone? The man smiled ambiguously. Do you need me to confiscate the things you've hidden under your pillow? Jinwan, what? How did he know? The man glanced at her again. Are you planning to make me admit that I'm treating you like a pig and depriving you of your freedom? Hiding your cell phone under your pillow is such a clumsy method. Do you really think I don't know? Jinwan, she had always thought that an upright man like Mo Jingshan would not do something like searching under her pillow, so she kept her cell phone there without worry. She did not expect him to know. However, in her impression, he had not had the chance to touch the bed she slept on, much less the things under her pillow. Jinwan thought for a moment. At the end of the day, she could only guess that it had something to do with the surveillance cameras in the corridor outside. Aolan International's corridors and doors all had high-definition surveillance cameras. This was not within her consideration. I told you to eat, drink, and rest well here. Aside from not allowing you to go out to enjoy the wind, when have I really restricted you? The man's tone was very calm. Jinwan didn't speak. She knew the condition of the wound on her head. Although it wasn't serious and she had been given a tetanus shot before she woke up, to avoid infection, it was indeed for her own good that she didn't go out and see the wind before she completely healed. She quickly ended the topic of hiding her cell phone and pointed at the door. Shall we let them in first? Mo Jingshan glanced at her again. Jinwan shifted her eyes away, refusing to look at him. However, based on his attitude toward Yengu, if she was really brought away by him, it was likely that Yengu would not have a good ending. Yesterday she had already caused Qin's sighting to be locked at the door. Today she had to be more restrained in her words and actions to avoid harming others. There was no need for her to speak. Based on the man's understanding of her, he could tell that she was weighing the pros and cons and decided to keep her mouth shut. Only then did he open the door. Jinwan rushed to open the door. When she opened the door, she saw that Yengu and the police officer were still standing by the door. Seeing that the door was open, the two of them turned to Jinwan in unison. Come in. Jinwan opened the door. The two of them looked at the door again before walking in. When he entered, Yengu saw that Jinwan's complexion was much better. He recalled the day when Mo Jingshan brought her out of the sea. At that time she was covered in seawater and there were blood stains on her head and body. Her complexion was unbelievably pale. He couldn't help but say apologetically, Sister Nguyen, I'm really sorry. That day when you were kidnapped by the kidnappers, the police and I were busy chasing after other people. We didn't expect that you would be trapped. Jinwan raised her eyebrows and smiled disapprovingly. Since you're trying to protect more innocent citizens, I won't argue with you. Aren't you going to take a statement? Let's begin. The police officer who came with Yengu took out a notebook and a recording pen. Jinwan politely invited them to sit down. However, the two of them glanced at the surroundings and then at Mo Jingshan, who, although allowed them to enter, maintained a cold and indifferent expression. Neither of them dared to sit down and only stood in the middle of the living room, planning to quickly take their statements and end this quickly. The two of them asked Jinwan a few questions. After receiving Jinwan's cooperative answers, they turned to Mo Jingshan and asked him a few more questions. Although Mo Jingshan's tone was indifferent and impatient, at the very least he was cooperative. Although his answers were short, Yengu and the police officer who came with him heaved a long sigh of relief. No matter what, their task of asking them to take a statement was about to be completed. After asking all the questions, Yengu asked about Jinwan's injuries that day. The other police officer put away the notebook and then turned to Mo Jingshan with a serious expression. Mr. Mo, your car was salvaged that day. However, the body of the car was badly damaged and the car was seriously flooded. It has already been treated as a scrapped car. However, at that time, you and Miss G were innocently kidnapped. It's really fortunate that you were able to escape in the end. Our police have specially held a meeting to discuss this matter. Regarding your ghost, after we calculate the appropriate compensation price, we will discuss the specific matters with you. However, because your car is really too expensive, the calculation time and the time we have agreed on may have to wait. Mo Jingshan lightly and indifferently responded. And by the side, Jinwan heard these words. Although the car was not hers, she still instinctively felt her heart ache. Mo Jingshan's Ghost was a world limited edition commemorative car. Even if the police wanted to compensate for it, if they were to ask for 1/6 of the original price, it would most likely cost more than 10 million yuan. The police would indeed need to discuss this price carefully. They definitely could not fork out so much money in such a short time. Fortunately, the moment Mo Jingshan drove the car into the sea, he had already prepared for the car to be scrapped. He did not intend to haggle with the police over the compensation rights and amount. If he really wanted to haggle over it, the police in High City and some of the directors would most likely cry and bleed. When Yan Gu and the others were preparing to leave, Jinwan was about to stand up to send them off when she suddenly received Mo Jingshan's gaze. Did he really want her to resign from Yan Ji's bodyguard job right now? There were other people by Yan Ji's side. If she were to directly resign from his part-time job, it would be too disrespectful. Furthermore, although Yan Gu was only a year younger than Jinwan, he had always taken care of her. Perhaps because he had spent many years in the police academy, he was a very upright and charismatic person. More importantly, he treated Jinwan very well and was very responsible. She took the opportunity to send them out to chat with Yan Gu and the other police officer with a smile. She did not mention a single word about firing Yan Gu. In any case, she had no intention of quitting. Just as the two were about to leave, the man's cold and low voice abruptly rang. If you want to be a special police officer, then go back and do your job properly. It's best if you practice in a police station or another police department. A job like being a bodyguard doesn't suit you. It won't be of any help to your career as a special police officer. Jinwan, Yan Ji's footsteps faltered. He abruptly turned to look in Mo Jingshan's direction. Before he could speak, Jinwan had already quickly grabbed his arm and led him out the door. Seeing Jinwan tugging Yan Ji's arm out, Mo Jingshan's expression darkened. When they reached the door, Jinwan raised her hand and gestured for Yan Gu to keep quiet. Go back first. I'll tell you when I return to the company. Chapter 530. No, things haven't reached that stage yet. Jinwan consoled him. That's right. You've been fired. The man's calm and clear voice rang by the door. Jinwan abruptly turned to glare at the persistent Mo Jingshan. The man had one hand in his pocket and did not give Yan Gu any chance. His expression was indifferent, but his voice was as clear as his features. What are you talking about? The police officer beside Yan Gu asked curiously. Yan Ji's expression immediately darkened. He was about to flare up when Jinwan rushed to tug on his wrist, using her gaze to indicate for him to leave first. Yan Gu was clearly unconvinced. For someone like him who had grown up in the police academy and the special forces, even though he knew Mo Jingshan was above him, his unwillingness to submit was still evident. Jinwan glared at him in warning and poked his arm. Yan Gu suppressed his anger and glanced at Jinwan with a heavy expression. Jinwan gave him several glances. Yan Gu endured it and stiffly turned to enter the elevator with the policeman. Only when the elevator brought the two down did Jinwan turn around. She raised her eyes to meet the man's gaze. This brat has only been your bodyguard for less than a month. His feelings for you are already so deep that he needs to exchange glances with you for half a day before he's willing to leave? The man looked at her. His voice was mild and displeased. Wasn't it too obvious that the vinegar jar was overturned? Jinwan composed herself. Her red lips curved into a smile as she tilted her head to look at him. She spoke with some pride. This is probably the charm of a person. In the past, when Feng Ling was by my side, weren't there many people who said that she was cold, unwilling to get close to others and never made friends? But not long after, didn't our relationship become very good? Mo Jingshan's elegant brows moved slightly. She was speaking the truth. Jinwan's personality was not particularly flamboyant, nor was she particularly reserved. She was not deliberate at all, but she had a unique charm that made people instinctively like to get close to her. Jinwan gave people a comfortable feeling. This was Feng Ling's evaluation of her. In the afternoon, the doctor came to check the wound on her head and confirmed that after days of careful care, the surface of the small bruise on the top of her head had healed a lot. From tonight on, even if she washed her hair with water, there would be no problem as long as she washed it gently. Hearing this, Jinwan immediately felt that her head was no longer itchy and uncomfortable. These days she had to wear a waterproof head cover when she showered every day and could only wash the lower half of her hair. As for the top of her head and the injured scalp, they had not been soaked in water for several days. No matter how clean it was, she was still not used to it and was especially itchy. When the doctor left, Jinwan didn't need to stay up until night. She rushed into the bedroom and then the bathroom. Finally, after washing her hair from the roots to the ends, she came out looking refreshed. She picked up the bag of lingerie that Mo Jingshan had bought for her, opened it, and her expression immediately darkened. Last night, she was still wondering how a man like Mo Jingshan, with his status, managed to buy her underwear. Who would have thought? What's wrong? The bedroom door was suddenly opened. Seeing Jinwan's dark face, Mo Jingshan asked. Jinwan held a set of underwear in her hand and squinted at Mo Jingshan. What kind of taste do you have? When have I ever worn underwear of this color and this type? Mo Jingshan looked at the two things in her hand. Not only were they bright red, but they were actually of a pathetically small style of sexy underwear, and they were very interesting. She basically couldn't wear them inside in daily life. Even if she wore them, she wouldn't be wearing them at all. Mo Jingshan. This underwear was definitely not of low quality. After all, Mo Jingshan had bought it in a commercial street near the company. The brands that could be opened in the nearby commercial street were either luxurious or expensive. Mo Jingshan didn't have many opportunities to buy things in person, and in the past 3 years he had even fewer opportunities. He remembered Jinwan's habit after showering every day and knew that there was only a set of underwear in the clothes that Auntie Chin bought for her. To prevent her from making excuses to leave, he left the company after the meeting, casually strolled along the commercial street, and stopped in front of a lingerie store. He really hadn't studied women's underwear much. He only told them Jinwan's size and asked the shop assistant to pick 2 suitable pieces to wrap and bring them to him. However, he didn't expect that when those young female shop assistants saw a man wearing a suit and tie and exuding the aura of a superior running out to buy women's underwear, they completely misunderstood him. They thought that he was trying to have some fun, so they specially chose 2 sets of this type. Mo Jingshan glanced at the 2 pieces of fabric in her hand. I only told the shop assistant the size. I didn't expect that they would bring out this type. When it came to sizes, no one knew her underwear better than Mo Jingshan. Jinwan's face burned suspiciously. Seeing that the man was still calm and didn't have the slightest bit of guilt, it seemed that he really didn't deliberately buy it. However, she couldn't help complaining, what kind of mentality do shop assistants have these days? Don't tell me they think that you're keeping a third-rate little star as a mistress and are trying to do something sexy for you? Mo Jingshan smiled. He also didn't expect that these young ladies who worked as shop assistants would let their imaginations run wild. However, although the color of this underwear was a little gaudy, based on Jinwan's figure and appearance, she would be able to handle it. Mo Jingshan couldn't help but imagine the scene of Jinwan wearing this set of underwear. His lower body could already faintly feel the blood rushing down. Later, I'll have Auntie Chin buy 2 more sets for you. Then what should I wear now? The man was quiet for a few seconds. Why don't you feel wronged? Wear this first? Jinwan, only if I'm crazy would I wear this kind of damn thing to walk around in front of you. Mo Jingshan's eyes were smiling as he curved his lips. I don't mind if you walk around in front of me without any clothes on. Auntie Chin, who had just returned from tidying up the study, heard these words and was instantly dumbfounded. She then quickly entered the study to continue tidying up, trying her best to act as though she was invisible. Jinwan was annoyed. Right now the sky is still bright. I'll go by it myself. The man glanced at her. Are you going? Jinwan furrowed her brows. The doctor said that the surface of the wound on my head has already healed. I can touch water and go out to see the wind. There shouldn't be any problems. I'm not used to having others buy this kind of thing for me. I'll go buy it myself. Speaking up to here, she paused. She recalled that after showering she had already washed the set. Right now, if she were to use a hairdryer to dry it, it would take at least half an hour. She couldn't just go out without wearing anything inside. The man could easily see through her thoughts from her expression. He smiled ambiguously, clearly patiently waiting for her to put on this set before going out. Chapter 531. Putting it on was as good as not wearing it, but she couldn't just go out like this. After hesitating for a long time, Jinwan suddenly threw the 2 pathetically small pieces of fabric into the trash can with a look of disgust. The man's smiling expression immediately sank. Jinwan turned back to the bedroom with a proud expression, went to the bathroom to take out the previous set, turned the hairdryer to the highest speed, and spent 15 minutes to dry it. Then she quickly put it on and came out clean. Mo Jingshan's well-defined fingers gently tapped the back of the sofa. Looking at Jinwan, who had already put on everything and came out, his elegant and deep brows moved slightly, and he said casually, "You can't wear the other set either?" Jean Wan said unhappily, the other set is black, and the style and fabric are no different from this one. Anyway, she would never wear it. But she knew that this brand was very expensive. The red set had already been opened and taken out. As for the black set, she should ask Auntie Chen to find a chance to return it and exchange it for some money. After all, it was worth several thousand yuan, enough for Auntie Chen to pay for half a year's tuition for her youngest son. There was no need to throw it away. It's raining tonight and there are still 3 hours before evening. Are you sure you want to buy it yourself in such a short time? The man's tone was extremely indifferent. Although the wound is fine, I can't go too far. I can only stroll in the nearby commercial streets. All right. There is a department store nearby, and there are several commercial streets nearby. It's enough for me to stroll around. She could finally come out to breathe a breath of fresh and free air. As soon as she came out, Jean Wan felt that she didn't want to go back. In the department store near Aolan International, Jean Wan not only bought 2 sets of underwear for herself, but also bought a variety of other clothes and necessities. After all, she hadn't gone shopping for some time. If it weren't for this place, she would have been so busy that she wouldn't have the time to go shopping. Rather than saying that Auntie Chen followed her and helped her carry things, it was more like Mo Jingshan sent Auntie Chen to follow her to prevent her from running around. Mo Jingshan did not go to the company today. Earlier, Shinmu had brought some things for him to sign, so Mo Jingshan did not come in. He had Auntie Chen accompany Jean Wan to buy them. There were many situations in which a woman bought clothes. Some people shopped all day but didn't buy much, but Jean Wan was different. It didn't take her 3 hours at all. She only spent an hour to buy a lot of clothes. She bought whatever she saw that caught her eye. She came out to buy things, not to shop at all. In the past few years, she had been like this even when she was out shopping. She didn't have the time to pick and choose. Her skin and figure weren't very picky about clothes. Any style on her was more beautiful than a model's drawing, so she just took whatever she liked. She didn't have the leisure to compare or try it on. Wrap this up for me, thank you. Although it's the end of summer and it's still very hot, it's going to be autumn soon. Is this trench coat this year's new style? Not bad, wrap this up too. The material is very soft. It should be very comfortable to sleep in. Wrap it up. Does that pair of shoes have high heels? Oh, these sunglasses are good. After shopping, Jean Wan carried 2 bags in each hand, and Auntie Chen followed behind with a few bags. Jean Wan didn't want her to help, but she insisted. Knowing that Auntie Chen was sent by Mo Jingshan, she was more or less unhappy that Auntie Chen was on Mo Jingshan's side, so she let her carry. Anyway, although there were a lot of things, they were not very heavy. At the cashier, Jean Wan habitually wanted to take her card, but her hand suddenly paused in the air. Only then did she remember that she had no money now. When she went out, she was in such a hurry that she even forgot to take the dozen notes and cell phone under the pillow, not to mention that it was not enough even if she took it. The staff at the cashier had taken the payment forms for the things she bought and set a number. Jean Wan didn't deliberately buy anything too expensive, but in this shopping mall, any piece of clothing would not be cheap. The total value of these things added up to more than 6 figures. Mrs. Mo, you didn't bring money? Seeing Jean Wan's expression was a little embarrassed, Auntie Chen stood by and asked in a low voice. Jean Wan pursed her lips. For a moment, she wanted to ask Auntie Chen to pay for it and return it to her later, but Auntie Chen's family was ordinary, and there were many poor relatives who borrowed money from her. Her youngest son was in high city and needed money to go to college. How could she have so much money in her card? Jean Wan didn't ask. What if she didn't buy it? She was hesitating awkwardly whether to send the clothes back to the various brand stores when a slender and well-defined finger suddenly appeared in front of her, handing over a black bank card. Jean Wan turned to see Mo Jingshan's calm face, and her embarrassment immediately disappeared. She subconsciously muttered, "It feels so bad to have no money, no card, and no cell phone." Mo Jingshan looked down at her and smiled casually. "Don't you still have me?" With that, before Jean Wan could speak, the man put a white outdoor cap on her head. Jean Wan raised her eyes only to find that most of the light was blocked by the brim of the cap. She could only look up at the man who was much taller than her, and her eyes were full of obvious questions. "Why are you here? If you want to go out these days, try to wear a cap. Although the skin on the surface of the wound has healed, it's better not to be exposed to the wind." The man looked at her wearing a hat and raised her head like a primary school student. His lips curved into a gentle arc. He paid for the cap, took the 2 bags of things from Jean Wan's hand, and took those from Auntie Chen's hand. Seeing that Mr. Mo was so patient and indulgent to Jean Wan, Auntie Chen smiled sincerely. In the past, she rarely went out with them in the Yew Garden, so she didn't know their relationship and development. In the past, Grandfather Mo asked her to keep an eye on them and report to him whether their married life was harmonious or not. That feeling was different from now. After these 2 days in Aolan International, she felt that Mr. Mo really treated Jinwan differently from others, and now she felt that both Jinwan and Mr. Mo were rare beauties in the world. Walking side by side like this, people would turn their heads to look at them. Moreover, Mo was usually such a noble and indifferent person. He would personally buy Jinwan underwear and take the time to go shopping with her. Even though Jinwan had never been nice to him, he still doted on her as if everything was so natural and right. Chapter 532. To Auntie Chen's surprise, after she went to the supermarket to buy various ingredients in the afternoon, Mo Jingshan asked her to leave. Auntie Chen asked what about dinner? Mo Jingshan said he would cook. So when Auntie Chen left, she still looked incredulous. When she was in the Yew Garden, she had never seen Mr. Mo enter the kitchen, but when she saw Mr. Mo washing vegetables just now, she felt that he seemed to be very good at cooking here. She really didn't expect that Mo Jingshan, who was usually the most noble, cold and indifferent person in everyone's eyes, would actually cook dinner for Jinwan. But Jinwan. At this moment, Jinwan was holding an iPad that she bought in the mall today in her bedroom. iPads were no longer uncommon in the future, but this year they had just become popular. She lay on the bed and watched movies on the iPad, acting as if nothing had anything to do with her. All she did was eat and sleep like an ingrate. However, Mr. Mo completely indulged this ingrate and let her be happy. Auntie Chen silently looked at Jinwan lying on the bed and remembered that in the months after she and Mr. Mo returned from the United States 3 years ago, Mr. Mo didn't come home every day, but Jinwan stayed at home every day, waiting for him to come back. She remembered that once, because she thought Mr. Mo would definitely return to the Yew Garden that day, Jinwan specially cooked a table of delicious food for Mr. Mo, but that night, Mr. Mo still didn't come back and didn't even answer Jinwan's phone call. Later, the food was cold and couldn't be eaten. Jinwan sat at the table alone and ate the cold food silently. At that time, Auntie Chen didn't even dare to say a word to persuade her. She just felt sorry for her. Thinking of this, the thought of feeling indignant for Mr. Mo suddenly disappeared. Instead, she smiled. In fact, it was quite refreshing to see Mr. Mo, such a cold and arrogant person, compromise little by little for Jinwan. Even after Auntie Chen left, Jinwan was still watching the iPad on the bed. The room was very quiet and only the sound of the movie could be heard. At this time she was watching a very ordinary movie that had just been released, but in recent years there weren't too many good movies in China. They were all made by some veteran directors and some were not funny. She was too lazy to find Hollywood movies, so she casually opened it and watched it for a while. His acting was a mess and he wasn't paying attention at all. It had been a while since Auntie Chen left. Jinwan finally turned off the iPad, threw it aside, got up and walked out. Hearing the sound of the kitchen, she thought for a moment and went in. The man in a shirt and trousers was standing by the cupboard. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, revealing his muscular forearms. She leaned against the kitchen door and watched the man wash or cut the vegetables while preparing dinner. Her eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of mist. In these 3 years, she had never thought that such a day would come. "Why don't you continue to watch your movie?" The man was cutting vegetables and didn't look back, but it was obvious that he was talking to her. Jinwan was still leaning against the kitchen door. Earlier, before Auntie Chen left, she hid outside the bedroom door and stared at me for a long time. She must have felt that it was too much for me to let Boss Missouri cook dinner without even helping. Mo Jingshan's hands did not stop moving. "Watch your movie in peace. I'll call you when dinner is ready." Jinwan thought of the extremely boring movie just now. It was better to stand here and watch Mo Jingshan cut vegetables than to watch that kind of movie. Noticing that she did not leave, Mo Jingshan turned on the tap to wash his hands and slowly wiped them. "Do you really want to help?" Jinwan did not speak. She was just saying that. After being locked up here for several days, the resentment in her heart had not dissipated. Standing in the same apartment with him was already very irritating. She did not really intend to go into the kitchen. After all, no matter how big the kitchen was, it was still a relatively small space. She would certainly not take the initiative to go in. But Auntie Chen had bought too many ingredients. She had probably planned to make a good meal tonight, but Mo Jingshan had taken over. If she really did not help, who knew when she would be able to eat? Her gaze swept over the pile of ingredients on the cupboard and she walked over. Jinwan was about to say that she would not do anything else but bring the oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar and cooking wine over and help him make some seasonings, such as sweet, sour, salt, and a small amount of soy sauce for the sweet and sour fish, and various seasonings for the mushroom soup, and she had just walked over and was about an arm's length away when her wrist was suddenly caught by the man. Before Jinwan had time to speak, she was dragged by him and stumbled in his direction. When she hurriedly tried to steady herself, the man had already kissed her. Jinwan was stunned for a moment. When she came to her senses, she hurriedly stepped back and pushed his shoulder hard, but the man held her waist and brought her back. In just 2 steps, he directly pressed her against the counter of the cupboard. Ugh! Jinwan instantly widened her eyes and tried to step back with both hands and feet, but the man still firmly held her. It was not a fierce and hot kiss, but their lips were pressed together, gentle and intoxicating. But because she subconsciously struggled a few times, the man who was originally very gentle simply pried open her lips and teeth, invaded her and entangled with her. It was like an ambiguous, gentle and forceful invasion, and Jinwan struggled to push him away and hugged him. It was not until Jinwan bit him hard that the man's movements paused. He lowered his eyes to look at her cheeks flushed and panting from the kiss. "I'll cook." "What are you doing, ah?" Before she finished speaking, a short, low cry followed, and Jinwan's body was suddenly picked up by him. It was not the kind of hug that wrapped around the waist, nor was it a hug. Instead, he held her armpits like holding a child and lifted her off the ground. In an instant, she had changed from leaning against him to sitting on the counter of the cupboard. She was still in shock and widened her eyes, staring at the man in front of her in disbelief. "What are you doing, ugh?" Her lips were kissed again. The man was tall and had long legs. He was completely unaffected by her sitting so high. This time, Jinwan didn't have to be held up by him. She raised her head and was kissed by the man at eye level. She sat on the cupboard. Not far from her was the stove that had not been turned on, and not far from her was the refrigerator. There were some bowls, chopsticks and plates behind her. She did not dare to move, but her stiff posture allowed the man to linger in her mouth for a moment as though he had succeeded. Chapter 533. He stroked her cheek with his palm and curled his lips. "Don't you want to help me? Sit here and let me kiss you for a while, en?" Jinwan stared at him in shock. What kind of help was this? Being stared at by the man at such a close distance. Her heart was thrown into disarray. She rushed to push him away. "This is the kitchen, and the cabinet is also." Before she could finish her words, her lips were kissed again. Mo Jingshan's hand moved from her cheek to her shoulder and then to her back. Jinwan trembled all over, but he did not let go of her. He unhurriedly kissed her from her lips to her earlobe. "Obediently stay here and let me kiss you. That's the biggest help." Jinwan's eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of water from the kiss. She finally focused her gaze on a certain point on the kitchen wall. The man's hand had already reached over. She immediately shivered and cried out in anger, "Mo Jingshan!" "Jinwan!" She abruptly slapped the man's hand away from her waist and then pushed him harshly. This man was really shameless to the extreme. Jinwan felt that she had never seen him so shameless in her 2 lives. How could he have the cheek to act like a gangster toward his ex-wife? However, before she could scold him in anger, the man's kiss landed once more. It was gentle and suppressive and the kiss was heavy. It was not until a strange and awkward sound came from Jinwan's stomach that the man finally stopped kissing her. The darkness in the man's eyes had not disappeared. It was clear that he did not want to stop with a simple kiss. However, Jinwan's stomach was too hungry, and it had already begun to protest. Jinwan was angry and embarrassed. She rushed to get down from the cabinet when he let go of her, but her feet were still some distance from the ground. She was trying to figure out which direction to jump in when the man's arms circled around her waist. He carried her down and placed her on the ground. This time he quickly let go. Just as Jinwan was about to fly into a rage, his brows moved slightly. "If you want to eat early, go back to the bedroom to watch your movie. If you stand here, you'll only affect my progress of making dinner. In the end, I'll eat you. It's not impossible. After all, I've been hungry for so long, en?" Jinwan, she felt that the little bit of gratitude she had for him was about to be used up. Staying here for a few days was a huge loss for her. An hour later, the boring movie on Jinwan's iPad was finally over. Jinwan turned over in bed and opened her sleepy eyes, which were so bored that she almost fell asleep. If it weren't for the fragrance of food, she would have fallen asleep. When Mo Jingshan brought the dinner to the table one by one, Jinwan had already got up and sat down at the table. Not to mention washing the dishes, she didn't even want to help him carry the dishes or hold the utensils. Therefore, her so-called help in front of the kitchen was basically the same as wanting to cause trouble. When Mo Jingshan handed over the bowl and chopsticks, Jinwan picked up the chopsticks and began to eat without saying a word. The man lowered his eyes and narrowed his eyes as he watched her focus on each dish while eating. She was satisfied with every bite. He curled his lips and smiled in satisfaction. If it weren't for the old affection she had for the food he made, it would have been very difficult for him to keep her here to recuperate. However, Jinwan's injury was no longer a problem, and it wasn't appropriate for her to stay in the company. MN Group was the empire she had built with her strong will and passion in the past 3 years. Even though Mo Jingshan now regretted leaving her so far away and letting her wings grow so hard that even though he had never really let her go, he still tried to pull her back with the thread in his hand, but it wasn't easy to pull her back. Mo Jingshan didn't ask her when she would leave, nor did Jinwan. From the food she ate, he could tell that she had a good appetite. After dinner, Jinwan no longer hid her cell phone. She nestled on the sofa and texted Xia Tian. Xia Tian sent several photos of the baby sleeping with a pacifier in his mouth, which almost melted Jinwan's heart. She held the cell phone and couldn't help kissing it, but when she saw Mo Jingshan coming over, she turned off the cell phone screen and didn't show it to him. Mo Jingshan watched as she pouted and smiled at the phone, but when he approached, she immediately put it down. At the same time, her expression turned fierce. His brows rose slightly. The difference in treatment was too great. When he put Jinwan on the table to kiss her, Mo Jingshan clearly felt that if he touched her like this again, he might not be able to control himself. At night, Jinwan went back to the bedroom to sleep. This time, he didn't insist on sleeping in the bedroom but slept on the sofa in the living room. The night was peaceful and harmonious. When Jinwan woke up in the middle of the night, she seemed to vaguely hear the sound of a shower coming from the spare bathroom outside. Why was he taking a shower so late? Jinwan thought she had heard wrong, turned over and continued to sleep. The next morning when Jinwan got up, it was past 8 o'clock. Auntie Chen hadn't come yet, so Mo Jingshan went to the company. She was alone in the apartment of Aolan International. Jinwan got up, stretched, and then went out to observe the situation outside. Seeing that there was no one else, she quickly turned to pack up her clothes, cell phone and other things. After packing everything up, she carried the bag she bought at the department store yesterday and rushed to the door, planning to leave. However, when she was changing her shoes in front of the door, she felt something on the door. She looked up and saw a white note stuck on it. It was a note written by Mo Jingshan, written with a strong pen. "There is toast in the kitchen oven. Leave after breakfast." Jinwan stared at the note for a long time, and her face darkened. She abruptly tore the note down. She could have texted or called him, but he had to stick it here. Was he deliberately making things difficult for her? Shine Group, not far from Aolan International. Outside the president's office, Mo Jingshan had just walked out when his cell phone suddenly rang. He picked up the phone and heard the person on the other end saying, "COMO, Miss G has just left. She took a taxi and left. It seems that she is going back to the west side of the city. Many of her documents haven't been completed yet. I guess she is going back to Yuehu Bay first." After saying this, the bodyguard waited nervously for Mo Jingshan's reply, ready to take orders to intercept her and bring her back. However, there was a moment of silence on the phone, and then the man's voice rang. "All right, I got it." Chapter 534. The bodyguard was surprised. "Mr. Mo, aren't you going to get her back?" Outside the CEO's office, the man in black stared at the changing numbers in front of the elevator in the distance, one hand in his trouser pocket, the other holding a cell phone, his handsome face as calm as water and his tone indifferent. "Wherever she wants to go, just watch her go back. Don't let her run around on the way. Watch her go back to the company or Yuehu Bay." The bodyguard on the other end of the phone answered, "Okay, Mr. Mo. Try to follow her without her noticing and keep her safe." "Got it." The security facilities in Yuehu Bay are quite good. If she goes home, let her go back to have a good rest. Don't disturb her. "Okay." After a pause, the bodyguard suddenly said, Miss G got out of the car halfway. She went to a roadside breakfast shop to buy some breakfast, took it to the car and continued to Xiqing district. Sure enough, she didn't take a bite of the toast left for her. Jinwan sat in the taxi, nibbling on a vegetarian bun and looking at her cell phone. When she arrived at Yuehu Bay, she paid the fare, quickly got out of the taxi and walked in. Although she didn't have any ID cards with her, fortunately she could enter all the entrances with her fingerprint and password, so she went home as quickly as possible. She hadn't been back for several days. Her home in Yuehu Bay was quiet and empty. After all, she had just moved in and all the furniture was new. She was the only one in the large apartment. These days, when she was in Aolan International, she wished she could grow wings and fly back, but now she was finally back. When she entered the door, she didn't feel anything different, but after resting on the sofa for a while, she suddenly felt that she was almost drowned by the silence and emptiness. Jinwan got up, opened the window, walked to the balcony and looked downstairs. The beautiful scenery of Yuehu Bay was in front of her. This was the 15th floor, neither too high nor too low, and there were all kinds of people downstairs. But when she came back just now, she noticed that the upper 5 floors hadn't been sold yet. Maybe the mysterious owner sold the house so smoothly that he offered a high price? Otherwise, why had the top floor and her floor been sold, but the lower floors hadn't been sold yet? She remembered that the furniture on the top floor had been moved out last time, but she didn't know when the new residents would move in. There weren't any neighbors that were too close to each other, making the house seem even quieter. She called the company and said that she would go over in the afternoon. She needed to take a shower at home, change her clothes and relax. For the whole morning she was bored to death. She found a book on the bookshelf and went back to the living room to read. Then she called the vegetable and fruit supermarket downstairs and asked them to send her some fresh fruits and ingredients. She planned to cook lunch for herself and go to the company after she was full. But when she arrived at the company in the afternoon, she did not expect to meet an unexpected guest. Seeing Jinwan coming, Xiaoba came up to her and whispered, "Boss, she has been sitting there waiting for a long time. We tried to persuade her, but she didn't listen. She refused to leave." Jinwan glanced at Ji Menggran, who was seated in the lounge on the first floor. Jinwan waved at Xiaoba, indicating that she should go do what she was busy with. A moment later, she turned to look at the people in the lounge on the first floor and walked over. The sun was shining brightly outside, and the lounge was illuminated by the sunlight. The temperature was moderate because of the air conditioner, and with the sunlight shining in, it was warm. Even the air was extremely comfortable. This was how Ji Menggran felt sitting here. Being in Jinwan's territory, Ji Menggran was not too arrogant this time. When Jinwan walked over, she raised her eyes to look at her and suddenly smiled at her. "Sister." This smile and the way she addressed her indicated that she came with a purpose. Jinwan glanced at the time and looked at her indifferently. "What's the matter?" Ji Menggran smiled at her and said, "Aren't I also in the real estate industry now? Our studio is developing well and has become more and more popular in the past 2 months. If you see the performance of our studio in the past 2 months, you must be very surprised, especially in the area occupied, resources and purchase rate." Ji Menggran smiled at her. Ji Menggran spoke slowly. "Especially this month, as far as I know, among all the companies related to real estate in High City, only our studio exceeded the quota at the beginning of the month and has been far ahead of others." Jinwan looked at her calmly, wondering what she was up to. Although MN Group started as a real estate studio, the company's industry chain now covered not only real estate but also the most profitable industries in recent years. In addition, in the past 3 years the domestic housing price had been rising at a frightening speed, so this year had come to a buffer period. Therefore, MN Group's primary goal this year was not real estate but other ways of making profits. However, she did not expect that Ji Menggran would one day come here to demonstrate or provoke hatred. Jinwan sighed in her heart. Now, no matter how much land Ji Menggran's studio bought, it was almost impossible to sell it at a higher price than the original price. It was difficult to maintain the original price. The government had always had a relative regulation policy, and this was the first time in the past 3 years that it had been implemented with great force. Ji Menggran happened to be stuck in this unlucky muzzle, but she did not know it. Ji Menggran smiled. "It's all thanks to Brother Sheng and the big shots of various real estate companies in High City that our studio can develop steadily. In the following days we will continue to work hard. Sister, when are you going to give me the fat piece of meat under your company's name? After all, I don't think you plan to continue working on that project this year, do you?" She was referring to a piece of public land acquired by MN Group a few months ago. It covered a large area, but Jinwan knew that the land could not make a corresponding return this year. In a year and a half, the advantage of the land would disappear, and the price would not rise much. Although it would not make a loss, it would not make a profit, so Jinwan stopped the project and put it aside for the future. She did not expect that Ji Menggran would take a fancy to that land and say it was a fat piece of meat. Did she want to snatch it from her? TSK. It seemed that Ji Mingran was keeping a close eye on her company. Jin Wan's achievements in MN Group were a thorn in her side. Everything was done so perfectly that Ji Mingran was so anxious that she wanted to come over and ask to buy that piece of land. Chapter 535. Ji Mingran raised her hand and made a two gesture. 200 million yuan. This price was higher than Jin Wan's initial estimation. The piece of land that she had always thought would be ruined had now become a fat piece of meat in Ji Mingran's eyes. It seemed like Jin Wan's remaining prediction ability could only be used to scam this so-called little sister of hers. Jin Wan coldly curved her lips but did not immediately agree. She only said, "You should know that the price of all the land acquired by MN Group will increase by several folds. However, recently, our company really hasn't been able to devote too much attention to real estate. Regardless of our current relationship, considering that we grew up together, it's not impossible for me to give it to you. Add another 50 million yuan and the land will be yours. Otherwise there's no need to talk." Ji Mingran immediately became unhappy. "The moment you opened your mouth, you raised the price by 25%. You even said it was because we grew up together? Are you sure you're not scamming me? If you think I'm scamming you, just stand up and leave. No one will stop you. You have to understand that you were the one who specially came to ask for this piece of land. You were the one who came to talk to me. I'm already giving you some face on account of Dad by not chasing you out. Don't tell me you expect me to sell it to you at a loss? Have you forgotten how much I hate you? Being willing to sell it to you is already considering our past relationship. What more do you want?" Jin Wan smiled faintly. Ji Mingran's expression was ugly. "In the past 2 months, our studio has purchased a lot of land. All the liquid funds have been paid out. Right now, we can only take out 200 million yuan. You know, Dad hasn't paid much attention to me these past few years. He won't care even if I'm short of money. Can you just forget about this 50 million yuan on account of the Ji family raising you?" Jin Wan smiled indifferently. "Don't you always have your brother Xing?" Although Xing Yihan was willing to give her money, he had been appearing and disappearing mysteriously recently. Ji Mingran was also embarrassed to say that it had been half a month since they last met. Ji Mingran thought about it and said, "Oh yes, you were out on a business trip during the Dragon Boat Festival and couldn't make it back. You also didn't go back to the Ji family to celebrate the festival with Dad. If you don't have anything going on, why don't you go back to accompany him? You're still talking about nostalgia? I see that ever since you found out that you're not related to the Ji family by blood, you've always had ulterior motives. You don't even have the slightest awareness of being a member of the Ji family." Ji Mingran knew that Jin Wan was already impatient with her. "I'll consider the matter of 50 million yuan. I'll give you a reply in at most 2 days." After speaking, she stood up to leave. If it weren't for the fact that she felt that the piece of land would be the biggest fat piece of meat, she wouldn't have taken the risk to personally ask for it. However, Jin Wan's attitude was better than she had expected, but who knew what Jin Wan was up to? After all these years, Ji Mingran had learned that although Jin Wan didn't seem to be very aggressive, she was actually very powerful. The longer she sat here, the more she would be at a disadvantage. She didn't say anything. Anyway, she was determined to get that piece of land. Just as she was about to leave, Ji Mingran suddenly paused and turned to look at Jin Wan. "By the way, at the Ling Xiao Group's dinner party, sister, you were really outstanding. I didn't expect you to be Xiao Li's female companion. In fact, I'm very curious. The Mo family isn't enough. How can you get close to the Xiao family? There are thousands of beautiful women in this world. What makes you so seductive?" Jin Wan thought of what Mr. Xiao and Mr. Xiao said at Mr. Zhao's dinner party, as well as something she had suspected at that time. Of course, she never went to verify it, nor did she have the time to contact the Xiao family. She only glanced at Ji Mingran and smiled coldly. "I'm not just outstanding in other places. In the Ji family, aren't you also the one who lost favor?" Ji Mingran's expression instantly turned ugly. "No matter what, Ji Hongwen is my biological father. We are related by blood. Who do you think you are? Until now, you don't even know where your biological father is, let alone whose blood flows in your body." "Really? But in your biological father's eyes, which daughter does he want the most? I don't need to emphasize this point, do I?" Jin Wan still smiled calmly, her eyes cold. To be honest, there was no need to deliberately provoke her. After all, to a person like Ji Mingran, any effort was not worth it. Ji Mingran's expression stiffened. Today they were here to discuss that piece of land. She could not throw away this piece of fat meat that Jinwan had promised to sell to her because of a momentary quarrel. Ji Mingran suppressed the unhappiness in her heart and smiled carelessly. Then I'll have to trouble big sister to take into account that you stole my father's love from me when I was young and give me that 50 million yuan. Jinwan coldly evaluated, even family affection can be used as a bargaining chip. You really only care about profit. Ji Mingran sneered. Family affection? Dad clearly intends to hand over the inheritance of the Ji family's business to you, an outsider who shouldn't even have the surname Ji. If I don't take advantage of my youth to pave the way for my future and build a foundation for myself, don't tell me that in the future, I'll have to beg you to use the Ji family's assets to reward me with a mouthful of food? Even if I beg you, will you give it to me? Jinwan raised her eyebrows and smiled. I really won't. Ji Mingran's face darkened. She turned and walked away. Before walking out of the front door of the MN Group, she looked around again. The completely high-end independent office building and the corporate image all impacted her self-esteem. At the thought that Jinwan had done everything better than her, she was even angrier, as if someone was chasing her. She quickly disappeared in front of the office building of the MN Group. When Jinwan returned to the office, Xiaoba knew that Jinwan didn't get along well with that Ji Mingran, so she didn't mention that annoying person again. She just took the backlog of documents that Jinwan hadn't come to the company these days and needed to be reviewed by her personally. Xiaoba leaned against the desk and watched Jinwan flip through the documents and observe her expression. Why do you keep looking at me? Jinwan glanced at her indifferently. Xiaoba chuckled. I'm looking at you, boss, who has been nourished by love for several days. How is it? Are you and Xiao Mo really? Jinwan spread the documents in front of her deadpan, looking as if she was going to quickly solve these documents and bury herself in work. She didn't intend to chat about this kind of gossip at all. If you feel that working in High City is too easy and that it's useless to think about these things all day long, I don't mind sending you out. In the future, go on business trips everywhere for me. Don't always stand in front of me and burn your soul of gossip. Xiaoba. She instantly shut up. Chapter 536. At night, Jinwan returned to Yuehu Bay and slept on the big bed alone. She closed her eyes in the dark but couldn't fall asleep. It took her 3 years to adapt to living alone. However, Mo Jingxin used 3 days to break this habit. She had only slept on the floor next to him for 2 nights, but strangely, Jinwan felt as if something was missing. As her thoughts ran wild, Jinwan eventually drifted off to sleep. The next morning when he woke up, he felt uncomfortable all over his body. Although he had fallen asleep, he didn't sleep well. When he sat up, he felt that his shoulders and cervical spine were a little sore. It was probably because he had maintained a fixed position to fall asleep. Jinwan went downstairs for a morning jog. Her neighbor, who was jogging and exercising downstairs, greeted her out of habit and asked why she hadn't been seen these 2 days. Jinwan smiled and said that she had been out recently. She ran 2 laps back downstairs and saw the aunt living on the 7th floor chatting with someone. She greeted her out of habit and was about to go upstairs to take a shower and get ready for work. But when the aunt saw her, she suddenly turned around and asked warmly, Miss G, are you out for a morning jog again? By the way, the last few times I met you, you were in a hurry to get ready for work, so I didn't have a chance to talk to you. How old are you this year? Jinwan took a look at the aunt. 24. Oh, you're already 24? I thought you were less than 20. Are you married yet? No. She didn't have anything to say to anyone, let alone a warm neighbor who didn't know much about her. That's good. That's great. My son came back from studying abroad 2 days ago. He's studying for a PhD in finance. He's 28 years old this year. He used to do financial analysis for a large enterprise abroad. His annual salary is not bad. You can see that I live in Yuehu Bay. My son's height and appearance are also good. He's definitely a good match for you, Miss G. I'll introduce my son to you. Do you two want to consider a blind date? Jinwan? Ah. Blind date. After you moved here, I've been observing you for a long time. You usually go to work, stay at home, or run downstairs in the morning. You are very polite and greet us when you see us. I can see that you are a girl with healthy habits and good quality. My son is coming back and I haven't found a suitable girlfriend. I wanted to tell you a few days ago, but you haven't been around these days. Today you finally come. Jinwan pursed her lips and forced a smile. Andy, this is too sudden. Besides, a blind date is not suitable for me. If your son is so outstanding, there must be many outstanding girls who are worthy of him. I'd better forget it. Besides, I'm quite busy. My son is also busy, but you young people still have to get married no matter how busy you are. The auntie took her hand and gently patted the back of it to stop her from leaving, and then said, "Anyway, aren't you single? We all live here and we'll see each other all the time in the future. We can gradually cultivate feelings. The first step is to get to know each other. I don't mean anything else. I just want you to get to know each other. Then when your son comes back, let's get to know each other when we meet downstairs. I have to go to work later. I'll go back to take a shower." Jinwan said and was about to leave. "Don't go. Let's exchange phone numbers. My son will return to High City tomorrow. I'll make an appointment with you then. Let's go out for dinner, okay?" The auntie was too enthusiastic and kept holding Jinwan's hand. She often saw this neighbor. Some time ago, this auntie had given Jinwan the soy milk she made herself in the morning. Jinwan couldn't refuse her too thoroughly, but she really couldn't do a blind date. In order to get away in time, she left the company's business card with her work number to the auntie and didn't give her private number. Then she quickly entered the door. Jinwan thought the auntie was just on a whim, but she didn't expect there would be a follow-up. The next day, Jinwan had just gotten off work and walked out of the company when she suddenly saw someone waving at her in front of her. She looked up and saw the neighbor auntie waving at her excitedly. Jinwan walked over. "Auntie? What are you?" The auntie said with a smile, "I know you work here, but I don't know if it's inconvenient for you to answer the phone at work, so I didn't call you directly and just waited here. Come on, get in the car. My son will drive you to dinner." Jinwan paused and turned to see a blue high-end sports car behind the auntie. At this time, the driver's door opened, and a young man in a casual suit got out of the car and smiled politely at her. "Hello. Jinwan." "Hello." Then Jinwan had to get in the car despite all her excuses, and the auntie held her hand and chatted warmly for a long time in the car. They had booked a delicious French restaurant in advance. It was not on the west side of the city, but in a very prosperous area in the center of High City. After entering the restaurant, the auntie said that she would go out to make a phone call with a knowing look, and then left them staring at each other. Fortunately, the auntie's son was not a young man who had never seen the world. He took the initiative to introduce himself and then told her about his situation. He had just returned to China and hadn't found a job in China yet, so it was not very stable for the time being. If it weren't for his mother forcing him to introduce a girl to him, he probably wouldn't have any plans to go on a blind date or have a girlfriend, but he had a good first impression of Jinwan and hoped to get to know her first. The auntie's son was very measured in his speech, neither arrogant nor impatient. He didn't talk too much or too little. He was indeed a very good man in all aspects. As a result, Jinwan chatted with him a little longer. Later they talked about the changes in the business and financial situation at home and abroad. They got along well, and the expression on her face gradually relaxed and she even smiled. Shine Group. A man stood in front of the window when he suddenly received a photo sent by a bodyguard on his cell phone. He opened it and saw Jinwan smiling like a flower sitting opposite a man. Mo Jingshan still stood there, and all his eyes fell on the smile on the woman's face until his cell phone rang. He picked it up. The bodyguard on the other end of the phone said, "COMO, Miss G seems to be going on a blind date with a young man tonight. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."